ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 10 of the series, so be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku was in a special observatory room. Himiko was sitting right next to him, chowing down on their snacks before the festival even began. Izuku had to forcefully stop her from eating everything before it began. Izuku and Himiko had to hang out in this room, because obviously, the whole vigilante thing. Eraserhead also wanted to hang out in here instead of hanging out in the crowd. But apparently the moron lost a bet with Present Mike and now is assisting with the cockatoo in narrating. Poor man. But Izuku was excited and angry. Two very different emotions, but he was trying to push his emotion of anger down for the sake of his students. This was their big day, and Izuku was the person who had taught them. He was excited to see how far they would go for the victory and who would get into the tournament round. Although Izuku already had a good guess on who could make it. Izuku could judge by the events, which, surprise, aren't as random as UA tries to make them. Don't be mistaken, the events are solely random generated, but they are made a week in advance so everything is prepared. This year, the first event was an obstacle course, which Izuku intervened in with what the original plan was supposed to be. The race was going to be a flat race with robots, a geyser canyon, sand traps, and a minefield. But the problem was that if someone could fly, all of those obstacles could be ignored. Only one student had the capability of doing that for the entire time. Katsuki Bakugo. But Izuku wants to make him work for his spot, not just breeze through. He also bet that Katsuki would be thankful for making the race harder on him and not allowing him to have a free victory, which also makes Izuku proud. Before, he would have gloated at how easy it was. But now, he wants to earn things and would help the others as well. Something Katsuki would have never done in a million years, even if it was one of his old friends. The second one was tug team battle. Teams of 3 to 4 are selected by the students and are all connected to each other by a 10-foot rope. If it is cut by the student or another student, the team who cut the rope will instantly be disqualified. The headbands on the students are all of different point value which are determined by the placement they were in from the first event. This is the same everywhere. The first event dictates your points you are worth for the second event. That is always the case. Stolen headbands will count to the end score, but if a team ever loses all of their original headbands, they are out. For some reason, the first-place student has 1,000,000 points, which Izuku sees as heavily unfair, but Nizu was unwilling to change it. It causes instant targeting, and it has made people purposefully place lower to not get first place, or even top 10. The final event is always the same. One-on-one tournament with the top 16 from the last event. They run up from each bracket until there is one winner. Winner. Izuku runs a nervous hand in his hair, feeling his body start to tense up even more. He feels Himiko hold Izuku's left arm and snuggle up to him before pulling Izuku into a hug. One that Izuku gladly accepts it. The airborne camera on the TV they were watching was panning through the crowd, and he heard Himiko growl when a certain group of people came into view. Izuku felt tears start to attack his eyes, and he hugged Himiko tight. The people who he never wanted to see again were all right there. In a line, audience members of UA's sports festival. His parents, sister, Katsumi, Shoto, Zayato, and their mother Rei were all there. Izuku never wanted them here. They shouldn't even be here. But of course, they were allowed a chance. Why shouldn't they have one? Not only have they already had multiple chances before, but they must have another, shouldn't they? Izuku hated it. He despised them. Flashback. What? Izuku yelled. He stood up from his seating position behind Nizu's desk and stared at the chimera wide-eyed. Several emotions swirled around him as tears spilled from his eyes. Izuku smacked the desk in frustration. He felt betrayed, hurt, confused, angry, worried all at once from what Nizu had just told him. Nizu sighed and sadly nodded his head, keeping his paws together in front of him. This isn't my decision. Those 4 shouldn't have this chance. I gave them one, and they all failed. But Izumi's father All Might managed to convince the Hero Committee to give these kids a go. Whoever wins the sports festival will have to fight those 4. Whoever wins will be allowed to attend UA, Nizu said firmly, but you could tell that there was anger in his voice. Izuku croaked out a sob. He reached his hands up into his hair and grabbed a handful. He pulled onto it hard, with tears leaking down his face. Why? They had their second chance. They had it, Izuku croaked out, landing onto his knees and sobbing violently. Nizu got down from his seat and walked over to the sobbing Izuku. He pat the boy's back. I'm sorry, Izuku. They do not deserve this chance, but they are getting it anyway. My hands are tied for this. I deeply apologize, Nizu remarked sadly. Izuku barely registers what happens next, but he eventually remembers Himiko slithering around him and gripping him into a hug. He was still distraught and hurt and cried into her until he blacked out. Flashback over. Izuku glared at the TV. If any of those smucks make it in, Izuku will personally make their world a living hell. Katsuki enters the stadium and immediately winces at the booming claps and scream of the audience. The light also hurts his eyes, but he forces himself to look up, to stay standing tall and with confidence. He was going to be a hero, but he knew his main reason was the 4 people were in the crowd. Katsuki naturally looked around for them as the rest of the other classes came out. He heard Present Mike had introduced them as the class who survived a villain attack, which made him scowl. That isn't something to gloat about in his perspective. Several of them almost died, and it also seems as if that would put them higher than the other classes. But Katsuki was more focused on something else. His sister hadn't told him about it, because they have been nothing but feral ferrets to each other for months. But Izuku did, very angrily and sadly. Those 4 assholes are being given another shot for UA by challenging the winner of the festival and beating them. Katsuki's eyes finally found the bicolored hair of the Todoroki twins. He then found Izumi, Katsumi, as well as Rei Todoroki and the Yagi parents also sitting there. He matched Katsumi's heated gaze glaring down at him before turning to Midnight, who was yelling out, "Welcome everyone to this year's sports festival. But first we need to hear a word from the first year's representative. Katsuki Bakugo," she yelled out. Katsuki blinked in surprise. His friends around him clapped and pushed him up. Katsuki was still surprised. Why was he representative? Tenya was class president. Was it because he placed first in the entrance exam? It was the only guess he had, as Nizu nor any of the other teachers would just let him be the year representative. Katsuki walked up to the stand where Midnight was standing. She moved over from the microphone and signaled for him to take the place. Katsuki slowly walked over to the microphone and gave Midnight a look. She smiled gingerly and looked out to the crowd of students. Katsuki nervously took in a breath and his stomach felt light. Butterflies formed around before Katsuki squashed them down. He didn't know what he was feeling right now, and he knows for a fact that he doesn't like it. Katsuki took a quick look over to the people who he had left behind and glared for a second, steeling himself before speaking. Izuku wouldn't lie that he was slightly nervous, but he believed in Katsuki that he was better. But Izuku was very curious in what he would say. "I am here to win, and you should be too." Katsuki starts off, nervously swallowing the spit that had built up in his throat. "We want to be heroes, to make a difference in what happens in our lives in the future. So everyone here should be giving 100%. If you aren't, then you obviously don't belong. So give it your all, everyone here, because no one will be going easy on you, and there will be no cheap way out." Katsuki finishes before walking away from the microphone. What he wasn't expecting was the loud clapping and applause he got from the crowd. Even the other students cheered, mostly the hero course, but still. When he got back to his group of friends, they all patted him on the back and said that was awesome or manly in Ijiro's case. Katsuki smiled at that. He was being praised, not because of his quirk or because he proved something to the people around him. No, he was being congratulated for being a good person, not being in butt. He felt proud, like he had accomplished something. Not like before, though. It wasn't ego or anything else. It was just a good feeling welling up inside him. He wanted to feel it more. "All right, let's see what the first event will be," Midnight yelled. She walked over to a wheel. The students and the audience were all waited with bated breaths for what the event would be. Izuku and Himiko weren't, as they already knew what the event was. The wheel span. A color landed on the wheel with the picture of a man running. A screen appeared behind Midnight, and she shouted for joy. The words "obstacle course" appeared, and the class all looked up at that. Midnight, with a devilish smile, turned back around and strutted back to the front of the podium, she stood on with my sway of her hips than ever necessary. All right, boys and girls. Your first event is the obstacle race. Your task is to make it from the start to the finish in one go. But be careful. There are going to be some things in your way. There aren't a lot of rules, but the main one is to not purposefully harm someone. You can sabotage, but not to the point of severe injury. Now everyone, to the entrance of the stadium. Midnight yelled out. The first years all turned around and walked over to the entrance of the stadium. The general courses were all at the front to give them a little bit of an advantage, but it really didn't matter. They all stood, ready to run. Himiko had grabbed some popcorn for the occasion, which she happily shared with Izuku. All right, everyone. Are you all ready? Present Mike yelled over the microphone. Eraserhead groaned and slammed his head down onto the table. He had his arm in a sling as it was still injured from the USJ, but other than that, he's perfectly fine. Well, perfect as you can be when sitting next to the human microphone. The doors to the entrance of the stadium swung open, cracking out a bright light that blinds all of the students. Go, go, go! Present Mike shouts. With those shouts, the students started to scramble out. Unfortunately for the general course students at the front, they quickly found out that the immediate exit of the building is covered in a thin layer of ice. Himiko laughed at the unfortunate students who ended up tripping and slipping all over the ice, many of them falling onto their stomach or butt. Izuku just felt sorry for them. What's the point of giving them a head start when they purposefully make it hard to exit? But Izuku did smile when he noticed a certain purple-haired student of the general course being lifted over the ice by his classmates. The hero course students quickly sprinted ahead, most of them having the capabilities to maneuver of the ice with ease or destroy it. But that wasn't the first obstacle. No, the first obstacle was the huge zero-pointers that were used in the entrance exam. Tia was the first one to approach the zero-pointers since she easily jumped over everyone in the ice. However, she had to fall back as all 4 zero-pointers changed their attention to her. The other hero course students also arrived, but none of them could really do much to the zero-pointers. So the best option was to avoid them. Katsuki deduced this and smirked. He pointed his hands to the ground and let his palms ignite. From the propulsion of his explosion, Katsuki flew into the air and flew way above the robots. He easily took the lead and gained huge distance over everyone else. Katsuki saw that the next obstacle was a forest-type area. It bended around. Katsuki thought it was probably the best course of action was to just continue to fly over it. So that is what Katsuki attempted. But something slammed into his back. Katsuki coughed and roared in both pain and shock. Katsuki spun around and blasted whatever had hit him. He couldn't see much of it as his flash of light and smoke blocked most of it. But from the sound, Katsuki assumes it is metallic. Katsuki looks down and aims to fly back up into the air, but he feels himself being rammed into again. Katsuki shouts in pain as he hurls into the large leaves of the forest underneath him. Katsuki tumbles through the tree, hitting branch after branch before finally gripping onto one to stop his fall. With a grunt, Katsuki pulls himself up, resting his chest over the branch he caught himself on. He looks up and can see the hole of where he fell through from the moved leaves and broken branches. Katsuki then looks closer and sees a few things flying in the sky. They were drones. They weren't large, only about as big as his torso, and looked mostly flat, kind of like a Roomba. They had small wings and an engine that granted them flight. Katsuki smirked up at them. Didn't want to give me an easy victory, did you, Izuku? He smirked. Katsuki then looked around the tree before dropping down. The forest trees were dense together, which prevented him from just blasting around. He also couldn't fly over it from the patrolling drones in the air. Huffing in annoyance, Katsuki marched forward, using his explosions when he can, but mostly doing it on foot. Oh, our front-runner Katsuki Bakugo has been swooped out of the sky. But he is still up and going. But that has allowed the people at the back to catch up a bit. Present Mike yelled out. Katsumi smirked with sadistic happiness at that and pumped her fist in the air. Yet take that, CNT, she swore. Izumi flinched back from her friend's harsh words. Zayato seems to agree with that statement, but she still has a small smile on her face. Shoto mimicking that as well. Hey, settle down, Kakin. He may be hurt, Izumi says softly, but knows it would be pointless. Nah, he deserves everything pain-related he gets put through. Katsumi smiles in an unnatural way that only Izumi seems to take note of. Denki tried avoiding a zero-pointer, but it seemed dead set on striking him. For it being extremely large, Denki wasn't so sure about shocking it. But seeing how it wasn't letting him past was being an issue, Denki decided to give it a go. Charging up some electricity, Denki avoided the devastating stomp of the zero-pointer. He then slammed his hands onto the robot and released some electricity. The robot wasn't being as affected as much as he wanted. So, Denki ramped up. More bolts. He stopped when a loud bang erupted from the robot. Slowly, that zero-pointer started falling down. Squeaking in surprise and fear, Denki turned around and sprinted away, using a bit of his quirk to push himself further. The huge zero-pointer started to tumble. The students started to scream and rush back when they saw the behemoth fall to the ground. 2 students couldn't move fast enough, though, and the robot landed on top of them. The crowd gasped at that and were worried until they saw both boys bust through the robot. Ijiro and Tetsu activated their quirks and punched through the metal robot, then climbed out and sprinted into the forest ahead of them. Himiko laughed and made the comment of how they were long-lost brothers from their sheer similarities of their strange character. Izuka had to agree. Look at now, folks. The forest is proving to be a challenge to our students. The mud pits and smell are really throwing them off, but some are powering through. Tokoyami, Tsu, Shoji, Shiro, Shishida, Tokage and Kurwaro are all quickly making up ground on Bakugo. Present Mike narrates. He was right. Katsuki was quickly losing ground to those with better-suited quirks for this environment. But he still was the first to make it to the next obstacle. The canyon. Katsuki sprinted forward and took note of the obstacle. It was a large crater that stretched way too far for anyone to be able to go around it. It was a long drop down, so far that it would certainly kill someone, but there was a net to catch anyone who fell. But Katsuki wasn't intending on falling. There were large stones that could be hopped on, each at minimum 15 meters apart from each other, which would certainly make jumping across difficult. But Katsuki didn't have to jump across. He could fly, pushing himself up from the ground, but not too high to gather attention from the drones. Katsuki started popping explosions to get him to the other side. What he wasn't expecting was to be attacked. Hot water sprayed him from below. Katsuki gurgled from the sudden intrusion. He was lifted higher into the air. Katsuki opened his eyes when he finally felt that he wasn't being pushed up by high-pressured water. He looked down and saw that he was at least 100 feet in the air, and he was slowly starting to descend. Katsuki tried activating his quirk, but not so much as a spark appeared. The water really fed him. Katsuki, luckily, was going to land on one of the pillars, but he knew it was going to hurt. Bracing himself, Katsuki bit back a scream as he felt pain shoot up him through his legs like a dagger. He started coughing as a substitute from the pain and dropped to his knees. He looked behind him to see other students had finally caught up. Tsu and Hanta were having zero issue whatsoever thanks to their quirks. He was surprised when he saw Mizo flying. A few other Class 1B students were also there, but 2 of them seemed unsure of how to proceed, while the one that looked like the beast from that Disney film jumped straight on in and was pelted with the hot water, much like how Katsuki was. Katsuki had quickly been placed down to 3rd, but he was not a quitter. His quirk was still washed out from the time being, but he would keep going. He had to. Forcing himself up onto his feet, Katsuki looked around for the closest pillar. He was already close to the other side, but not close enough to jump to it. Katsuki spotted the closest pillar. It was way further than what he could jump, but he still had to keep going. Waiting for his quirk to come back was just losing him time. Taking a step back, Katsuki lined up for his jump. He then sprinted forward and leapt to the next pillar. He was nowhere close to making it on the top, but he gripped onto the side of the pillar. Grunting, Katsuki pulled himself back up and prepared himself to jump again. Would you look at that, folks? Tsu Azui has taken the lead, but if she wants to keep it, she'd better keep hopping fast. Looks like more students are reaching the canyon now. Present Mike yelled. Eraserhead sighed for what seemed like the 1,000th time that day while watching everyone run. Izuku frowned when watching the general course students and support students try and race. They all almost seemed scared and not really trying. Izuku understands that they may not have a suitable quirk for battle or movements, but other hero course students also have that issue. Like Toru, Kyoka, Kinoko. They don't have suitable battle quirks without the help of support items, and maybe if you squint, Kyoka has movement capabilities with her quirk. The only exceptions to that were Hitoshi, another girl from his class, and a girl with pink dreadlocks and several pieces of equipment. Izuku's eyes widened when she saw her fly across the canyon with her jetpack and boots. She actually seemed impressive. Not that he could admit that to Himiko. She'd take it the complete wrong way. Hanta and Tsu were now the two front runners, with Katsuki quickly catching up by flying low to the ground. Fumikage and Mizo also passed the canyon and now ran to the next obstacle. Setsuna and Jiroda were close to completing it as well. More hero course students approached the canyon. Mina was one of the first one and was able to traverse it quite easily. Her increased speed from her sliding on her acid made it easy for her to make it to the close jumps. However, this seemed to only hinder everyone else. It made people who present Mike like to call. The monkeys who were Kindu and Mashireo jumped from the side to side on the pillars, never touching the top. While other people weren't as affected by it, like Fyoki and Ochako, who flew over it or evaporated it. Katsuki was only slightly behind Hanta and Tsuyu when they reached the next obstacle. Luckily, he wasn't the one in the lead, as he probably would be the one suffering the consequences of what lies ahead. A minefield. Thankfully, Hanta found that out first. Well, folks, it looks like Zero is the first one to discover what the next obstacle it is. A minefield. Present Mike roars. Katsuki pushes himself to a stop and looks at the pink cloud that erupted from the ground. Katsuki looks all around the ground and can see the mines are incredibly close to the surface. His explosion would cause the mines to explode, so he can't fly close to the ground. He looked up and saw about 30 drones swirling through the air. Flying high is certainly a no. Screaming of Hanta wakes Katsuki up from his thoughts. He turns and spots Hanta land on the ground hard. The poor boy starts groaning as he rolls over in pain. Gritting his teeth, Katsuki turns back to the minefield. Tsuyu already has a huge head start, but he would not let her keep it. That's for sure. However, he would have to fight more people than just Tsu, as other students like Fumikage and Mina caught and made quick work of the minefield. They got through it way faster than both Tsu and Katsuki, and now were in the lead. What would you look at that? Tokoyami has taken the lead with Ishido right on his tail. The front runner for this race just keeps on suching folks. Present Mike yells with enthusiasm. Ochako makes it to the minefield somewhere under top. Her quirk in the canyon really made up her lost time. She looked around and flinched at the loud sound. Tagaru from Class 1B just hit a mine and blew up into the air. High into the air. Ochako then looked down at the ground. She noticed a mound where a mine was and got down on her knees. She swiped away the dirt carefully and gently grabbed the mine. She lifted it up without it blowing up, which was a relief for her. She saw another person fall victim to the mines. Ochako knew she could fly over it, but she had no clue how long the mine field actually stretched out. She was already feeling woozy from using her quirk at every other obstacle so far. She didn't want to vomit before the finish line, and with a horde of people coming up after her, she didn't have faith her ability to outrun them for the finish. So Ochako developed a plan. From what she saw, he was no burns on the boy who was hurled into the air, so the only damage it does is the shockwave from the explosion. If she can launch herself to the finish, she surely would have enough stamina to finish. So Ochako got to work. She shoveled up the mines and placed them off to the side. Others gave her weird glances, but continued to run forward. She ignored them, as well as the sinking feeling in her stomach as she quickly fell in places, but she kept digging and digging until she got about 20 mines. Ochako gently stacked the mines on top of each other, making sure that none of them would go off. Ochako took in a deep breath as she took a step back. She turned around, her back facing the mines. Ochako touched the pads on her left hand onto her arm. Taking in a deep breath and squeezing her eyes shut, Ochako jumped back onto the mines. The next thing she knew, she was flying in the air. "I see Uraraka is making herself a launch pad," Eraserhead said. One of the few things he said that day. But not many people paid attention to that, as they were all more focused on the front runners. Fumikage and Mina were fighting for first. Fumikage is covered in dark shadow to make himself go faster, but the beast also is extending its claws to swipe at Mina. Every time, however, she skillfully dodges like it's a dance and continues the slide with little setback. Katsuki manages to make it past the minefield, but has dropped to 10th at that point. But he would not be beaten. He revved up his quirk and smiled when he felt the burning pops in his hands before launching forward. Very quickly, Katsuki passed other people and made up his lost time. He quickly reached third and could see his two classmates fighting for first. But he could also see the finish line. So Katsuki stepped it up. Right before the finish line was a massive drop. It was an extremely steep hill that had been purposefully made smooth. Mina reached it first and covered herself in acid before sliding down and quickly reached insane speed. Fumikage decided to ignore that and sent Dark Shadow's claws out like wings and tried gliding down to the finish. He was going slower than Mina, but he was making more distance to the finish. It would be close between the three on who would make it first. 3. Yeah, because Katsuki was barreling in and was quickly approaching Fumikage. The three are barreling for the finish, each determined to make it first. Present Mike yells, forcing Eraserhead to use his quirk on the blonde as he hops out of his seat. But I don't think any of them are going to get it, Eraserhead said into the microphone, causing a hut to wisp out from the loud hero. Izuku and Himiko couldn't help but smirk when Ochako came crashing down. Right before the finish, she reactivated her quirk one more time to stop herself from dying on impact with the ground. Her head was spinning and her stomach was doing somersaults. But somehow she kept herself together. Ochako couldn't stay standing and slumped down to her knees. She closed her eyes as the light was hurting her eyes. She felt sick and she had no clue if she had even made it or was at the finish. She was at the finish line, right? She kind of just closed her eyes and prayed for the best. But then she felt firm hands grip her shoulders and a presence come down right next to her. The palms of the person seemed sticky and warm, so she didn't have to guess that Katsuki was sitting right next to her. Rubbing her eyes, Ochako turned to look at the mostly blurred figure of Katsuki Bakugo. She squinted her eyes and rapidly blinked to desperately try and get the water away and see clearly. Once she mostly had, she could see him smirking down at her. She couldn't help but smile back. "Did I make it?" she asked, slightly out of breath. His face was beet red, so she could tell he pushed himself far to make it. "Did you make it?" "Round cheeks, you won." Katsuki grinned. Ochako stared at him stunned. She then rested her eyes and allowed a soft chuckle escape her lips. She didn't want to believe him, call him a liar, but Ochako knew Katsuki. He wasn't in butt. She allowed him to lift her up. He swung one of her arms around his shoulder and helped her walk away. Ochako let Katsuki take her away, hoping that it would be to the infirmary because damn, does she have a killer headache. What an amazing finish. Uraraka set up a launch pad for herself and managed to snatch victory from Bakugo, who narrowly came second. Ashido barely scraped third with Tokoyami in tow as the 3 Hero Course students all passed the finish line within a second. Present Mike yelled. The other students all ended up finishing. The 39 Hero Course students all made it in predictably. That happens almost every year. The top 42 students get to make it to the next round, so 3 people from the general and support course are guaranteed to make it in. A few kids had to take a trip to the infirmary as they were injured during the race. Most of them being the students who made it into the next round. Everyone took about a 30-minute break as the students were all cleared up. Eventually, the remaining students came back onto the field and were greeted by the loud roars and cheers of the crowd. The quieted down as Midnight came up to speak. A wheel was right next to her, as well as a huge screen right behind her. Midnight struck a pose and liked her lips as she looked over the crowd. Mashireo leant over to Rikido and whispered to him. "Is Midnight-sensei really a good choice to run this?" he asked. Rikido shrugged his shoulders and shook his head and out his focus back on the screen. "All right, cuties. After that eventful round, I think you all are dire to know what is next in store." Midnight shouted, which received thunderous applause. Midnight swayed her hips as she trotted over to the wheel. She put her hands on top of the wheel before pulling down hard. The wheel spun and spun before landing on a picture of 3 people tied together by a line. The screen behind Midnight flared up and the words, "Tug Team War" showed up on display. Midnight yelled out in happiness before stomping over to the pedestal again. "What would you look at that? Tug Team Battle. The rules for that are quite simple. A team of at least 3 and max 4 will be paired together. You will be connected by a rope that extends at max 10 feet from person to person. You are not allowed to ever cut the rope. If you do, you will be disqualified immediately. Your objective is to steal headbands off of the other students while keeping yours at the same time. The headbands you wear all have different points determined by your placement in the first event. Seen here." Midnight shouts as she walks away to give clear view of the scoreboard. It goes like this. Kinoko Komori 5. Manga Fukudashi 10. Reiko Yanagi 15. Toru Hagakure 20. Tatsu Rikaira 25. This is the extra girl from Class 1C, but she won't have an impact at all. Koji Koda 30. Minoru Mineta 35. Kojiro Banda 40. Ibara Shiozaki 45. Rikido Sato 50. Nairinjiki Shota 55. Kyokujiro 60. Hitoshi Shinso 65. Yosetsu Aways 70. Yui Kodai 75. Mei Hatsum 80. Nido Monoma 85. Fyoki Nanami 90. Yuga Aoyama 95. Hiryu Rin 100. Juzo Hananuki 105. Hantasiro 110. Tetsu 115. Eijiro Kirishima 120. Denki Kaminari 125. Sun Kaibara 130. Kozai Tsuburaba 135. Pony Tsunatori 140. Mizo Shoji 145. Tagaru Kamakiri 150. Itsuka Kendo 155. Mashireo Ojiro 160. Setsuna Tokage 165. Shirhai Korwaro 170. Tinya Ida 175. Momo Yaoyorozu 180. Tsuyu Azui 185. Jiroda Shishida 190. Fumikage Tokoyami 195. Mina Ashido 200. Katsuki Bakugo 205. Ochako Uraraka 1 million. Ochako's eyes widen. She instinctively looked at number 1 as that was what she was told she was placed. The points above her are from Katsuki, who has 205 points. They are going up by increments of 5 each time, so why does hers change to 1 million? She can already see eyes turn straight to her, and she immediately tenses up. Those are the placements that you got, and how much points you are worth. The observant ones of you will have noticed that the first place person isn't worth 210 points. They are instead worth 1 million. Midnight smirks devilishly. Ochako flinches when the heads of everyone snap to her. She could hear the craning of others' necks face her. Izuku shakes his head in disappointment. Now she is going to be a high target. She would have been before with her point value of 210, but now she is basically a hit for mercenaries. No one will want to be on her team. Wow. The look in all of your eyes really turned me on. Midnight shouts with a stuck smile. Instantly, the moods in the students fall apart. They all look down and away with a face of appall and tongues sticking them out of their mouth in disgust. Izuku slaps his forehead hard while Himiko starts laughing at Midnight's incredibly stupid character. Eraserhead slams his head on the desk, while Present Mike groans and rests his head in his palm. Eraserhead, after a very long grunt and sigh, reaches forward and grabs the microphone. Choose your teammates now. You have 10 minutes, Eraserhead says in a tired voice before slouching in his chair again. He brings his injured arm up and lazily glares at it, as it is annoying him. The crowd instantly comes back to life, and people all of a sudden start pushing and shoving. Katsuki looks for a certain bob of brunette hair, but a large hand pushes him out of the way. Katsuki grunts as he falls back onto his foot harder than what he would have expected. He glares over to the unknown Class 1B boy who shoved at him before, trying to find Ochako again. He doubts anyone would come up to him. He has the second highest points. His amount alone is probably more than what some of the team's totals will end up as. Katsuki knows he is strong. He has a powerhouse of a quirk, but his mobility and shockwave would end up hindering others because of the tethering. If he could get Ochako as a teammate, perhaps they can wait out most of the fight in the air. He knows Ochako could only hold them up for maybe 6 minutes at most if they have a team of 3, but they could use that as instant safety at the end. Katsuki growls when he still can't find that bob of brown he is searching for. When he finally spots it, he sees Denki already talking with her. Katsuki doesn't mind Denki actually being one of his friends at UA, so teaming with him wouldn't be so bad. His quirk control is not the greatest, but he has improved. Katsuki knows that. Katsuki moves to walk over to them, but is stopped by a familiar sturdy arm locking his around the neck and shoulders. Bakubro, you still need a team, right? He heard Eijiro ask. Katsuki looks over to Ochako again and finds her following Denki in another direction. He feels disappointed but hides that feeling as he turns to face Eijiro's bright, toothy grin. He also spots Hanta and Mina behind him. Yeah, come on, Bakugo. Come with us, Mina says happily. Katsuki notes that Mina came third, so that already puts them over 400 points. Them alone would probably have them near the top point value teams already. That's not mentioning the fact that he will also be on a team with Ijiro and Hanta, two people who he knows scored pretty well. Other than Ochako's team, Katsuki believes he will be on the highest point value team. Something he'd rather avoid, but it is either this or nothing. Besides, he gets along with them. All right, Hammerhead, I'll join your team, Katsuki says. Ijiro somehow smiles wider and turns around. He high-fives Hanta and Mina, like getting him on their team was some kind of achievement. Katsuki feels a pit form near his heart, but shoos it away. He still is not a good person. Katsuki needs to keep reminding himself that. Ochako feels small. She has 1 million points. 1 million. Having her headband would be an instant win. So now she's a target. A huge one. She isn't like Katsuki with a powerful quirk or Mizo with a strong defense. She can make herself and other things float. Floating herself and her teammates may be useful though to secure a win, but they have to have a winning position by that point, as Ochako knows she can't hold out for 10 minutes. Ochako sees people instantly move away from her, and honestly it hurts. So she starts looking around for someone who won't. Katsuki perhaps, he is her closest friend here. She already sees Tsuyu and Tinya looking around for others, so they are a no. But she can't seem to find the explosive teen. She looks around for a little while for the familiar spikes of ash blonde hair, but comes up with nothing. Ochako sighs and slouches her shoulders. What was she going to do? If she couldn't find anyone to team with her, will she just be disqualified, or will she be put onto a team with 3? There has to be at least 2 teams with 3 as 42, doesn't evenly split into 4. Hey Uraraka, a voice chirped up from behind her. Ochako spins around and spots Denki smiling at her and moving over towards her. Hey Kaminari, do you want something? She asked tentatively. Not convinced Denki would want to be on her team. Well, I was wondering if you wanted to be on a team? Denki asked with a smile. Ochako eyes widened in surprise, but then came a smile of relief. Really? I'd love to, Ochako says, as she let out a breath before frowning again. Wait, we need at least one more teammate, Ochako says worried. Denki, however, smiles more and pats her shoulder. Don't worry, I think I have someone, Denki said before turning around. Her looked over his shoulder and waved at her. Follow me, he replied before walking off. Ochako could only nod her head despite the fact that Denki wasn't looking at her. She followed the electric blonde to where the person was. What she saw was a lone boy, scanning around, who had floating purple hair that seemed to defy gravity. He also sported heavy eye bags not so different from her homeroom teacher that made her worry about his health. He also seemed incredibly out of place, and Ochako can't even recognize him. The duo's approach made the boy turn and raise an eyebrow at them. Denki waved. Hey, you're Shinso, right? He asked, to which the boy seemed confused and slightly uncomfortable. Cautiously, he nodded his head. You also have a type of mind control quirk, right? Denki asked. Ochako could have sworn she saw fear and panic flash in the boy's eyes. He seemed slightly unnerved, but didn't make any complaints. Yes, I do, Hitoshi said. Denki's smile only grew wider as he looked over to Ochako. This made Ochako slightly scared. Denki had an idea, which always was worrisome to Ochako as she knew he wasn't the brightest cookie. But that didn't mean he was dumb. He was the one who took down that bioengineered thing at the USJ. So she had little power other than to let it ride. What's the worst that can happen? So you mess with the mental abilities of a person? So how would that work with nausea? Denki asked. Ochako suddenly was getting the idea of what Denki was thinking, and she wasn't 100% sure if she was okay with it. Hitoshi had to think for a bit. Well, in theory, I delay those types of reactions. I don't know in practice, though, Hitoshi admitted. Denki still smiled before turning back to Ochako. So you know what I'm asking, right? He asked Ochako. Yes, Ochako asked, slightly scared but would do it. It was a plan, and it wasn't likely they would get a better plan. So are you cool with it? Denki asks. Ochako fakes confidence and nods her head, but one thing she isn't faking is her determination. She wanted to win. Hitoshi finally recognizes the girl that has been silent for the entire time as he and Denki talked. Wait, aren't you the girl who won? Hitoshi asked, but knowingly, and Ochako could only sheepishly nod in response. Hitoshi sighed and slumped down, knowing that he was going to be on the targeted team. Denki smirked and walked to his side, slinging his arm around his shoulder. Welp, I don't see you going to any other team, so you're stuck with us, Denki grinned. Hitoshi sighed and dropped his head, rolling his eyes. "Oh boy," he said in a monotone voice. "All right, contestants. Are you ready?" Midnight shouted. Everyone was now in a team. They were connected by a tether that sprawled the teams into a line. There was over 15 teams, but they were all looking at a single one. Ochako, Denki, and Hitoshi. Hitoshi was at the back with Ochako slightly in front of him. Denki was in the lead looking around and being the protector. Unless they had specific quirks, no one could touch him, but he also was constantly putting his teammates at risk. Midnight raised her flag, and the teams got ready to run. Ijiro elbowed Katsuki, who growled in response, and looked over to him. "Do we go over to the 1 million?" he asked. Katsuki looked over and looked at the team. It was Denki, Ochako, and some other person from Class 1C. He didn't know their quirk, and most likely he wouldn't be a problem, but you can't judge a book by its cover. Katsuki shook his head. "No, none of us can get close to Pikachu. So we'll have to wait when he's shocked himself out from other team's stupidity or vending machine Momo takes him down. Besides, that purple-haired one is a wild card, and it would be stupid to underestimate him," Katsuki says sternly, getting the memo to his less bright friends who like being reckless. "Go," Midnight shouts. Instantly the teams to start get ready. For example, a full girls team takes charge at Denki, Ochako, and Hitoshi. That team is Setsuna, Reiko, Yui, and Kinoko. However, predictably, like Katsuki had said, the team was easily taken down by ignorance of Denki's quirk. Swiftly they all fell flat on the floor. Denki ran up with his teammates in tow and collected their headbands, immediately eliminating the team. Ochako spotted Team Tenya sprinting their way with Momo, Fyoki, and a girl she doesn't recognize. She also sees Tenya and Fyoki wearing some equipment that they shouldn't be. They look too steampunk-like to fit Momo's style, but they certainly fit the other girl from going off of her goggles alone. Most likely her doing. She pulls her team away by the rope, and they quickly follow. Hitoshi runs up to Ochako and grabs her shoulder. "Can you look at me?" he asks. She turns around to stare at his tired eyes. "What weighs more, ton of bricks or feathers?" he says hurriedly as the other team starts to gain on them. Ochako just opens her mouth, but nothing comes out as Hitoshi snaps his fingers. Ochako goes slack, her eyes becoming dull and her movements slowing down. "Float us," Hitoshi commands, and Ochako quickly complies. She floats the two boys first before floating herself. "Jump," Hitoshi hollers. He, Denki, and Ochako all quickly jump and ascend quickly, reaching way above the reach of the oncoming teams. Their ascension slowly comes to a stop. They look down, and all of the teams look like ants. Denki turns to Hitoshi with a grin, who in response rolls his eyes. "Well, let's hope we last the 10 minutes, because if we don't, we are fed," Hitoshi says, more to himself than the boy next to him, but Denki clearly heard. That thought was also in the back of the blonde's mind, but he was a lot more positive than his new insomniac friend. Since Katsuki's class was wise to wait on attacking the smartest team, that left him as the high-price target. Ijiro had already tanked a laser and fist from Rakido within the first 30 seconds of the match, and more teams kept on coming. Hanta managed to snag Toru's headband, and Mina got someone from Class 1B. Katsuki and Ijiro were more focused on defense, as they really couldn't afford to get risky. However, they were about to face the two strongest teams that could be thrown at them. "Bakugo move," he heard Hana shout. Katsuki barely had time to react when he saw a flying furry beast heading his way. He felt tape wrap around him, and he was jerked back. A flying fist narrowly missed him. Katsuki squirmed back up, and he saw Ijiro do the same in the corner of his eye. Hanta saved them both. He saw 3 members of Class 1B. The big one that looks like a mix of a human and bear was huge and stood at 8 feet tall as far as Katsuki was concerned. It was also broad enough to easily lift 2 people on their back. Those 2 being girls, one having vines for hair as she wrapped her vines around the stomach of the beast, herself and teammate to stop them from falling off, and the second one was a girl with fiery orange hair and a ponytail. The beast quickly turned to them and charged once more. Katsuki didn't have much time to act. A massive hand was made from the orange-haired girl, and vines shot out at the 4. Ijiro was in the lead and sharpened his whole body and got to work on slicing the vines. Mina tried multitasking on both the vines and the approaching hand, but it wasn't good enough. Katsuki was trying to save both of his hands for the large beast of Class 1B, but but he had to use on hand to create an explosion on the large hand threatening to flatten him. Aijiro and Mina cleared the vines, so he had a clear shot of the beast. But Katsuki had to be precise. With how big and animalistic the boy was, no doubt he can take a beating, so one explosion wouldn't be close to enough. Katsuki waited until the beast was right on him before forcing himself up and aiming his hand at the face of the beast. He had to let out everything he had. A large crackle and spark erupted from his hand, and a firework-worthy blast knocked the trio far away. A large dust of smoke blocked his view of them, though so Katsuki couldn't see if the beast was back up. With his other hand, he reached up and grabbed his right wrist that was starting to throb. He was really pushing himself. But Katsuki couldn't lose, especially with what is on the line. "Guys, help a bit." Hanta shouted again. Katsuki turned and saw Mizo running at him alone. Katsuki was confused for a second before he saw the way Mizo had his arms. He had created a shield with his arms on his back. Katsuki couldn't see into it, so he had no idea who was inside. It had to be a team of 3. There was no way a third person could be hiding in that shelter, even if it was Minoru. Which he knew it wasn't, as he saw that purple-haired pervert before on a team with a random Class 1B boy and that general studies girl who made it. Then it hit him. Fumikage is in that little cubby hole. Before Katsuki could call it out, 2 giant claws sped out from it. Their team was still a far distance away, but Dark Shadow moved incredibly quick in broad daylight. That could only be enhanced in the darkness. Katsuki had to act quick, and he quickly pointed both arms forward. Unfortunately, Mina and Hanta were both in his way. Katsuki could only get one word out. "Duck!" he screamed. Mina quickly hopped down, but Hanta jumped to the sides. The claws still shot forward, and Katsuki barely had time to light them up with his spark of explosions. The claws quickly retracted thanks to the light. However, that victory wouldn't be celebrated for long. Where Katsuki had hit Dark Shadow with light, smoke now replaced it. Thunderous stomps were heard behind Katsuki, and he knew what that meant. They had to move, to run. "Get up. We need to book it away." Katsuki shouts as he drags his teammates by the rope closer to him. Not once to question Katsuki, Hanta and Mina swiftly booked it away, using their speed to create as much distance as possible while Aijiro and Katsuki tried to keep up. Katsuki watched Jiroda swipe away the smoke with his large bear-like hand. He unleashed a mighty roar before lunging at Katsuki and Aijiro. Aijiro hardened himself, but Katsuki knew that they had to get away. He got behind Aijiro, and with his right hand, holding his waist, he pointed his left hand at the oncoming monster and used his explosion to propel himself away. He didn't get very far, though, as he had the weight of Aijiro with him. But luckily, tape flew around him again. Katsuki was yanked back, and he still held Aijiro firmly. They landed next to Hanta and Mina, who were still moving away. Katsuki now had a bit of time to breath. He checked his team and saw that both Aijiro and Hanta had lost their headbands. Katsuki stood up, and as he chased the 2 leaders, he yelled out, "Where the F have your headbands gone?" Aijiro looked sheepish, and Hanta ran a hand through his hair. "The vines took mine," Aijiro admitted. "Ajui was with Shoji and snagged mine." Hanta shouted behind him. Katsuki could only grunt. They had 4 headbands now, but only 2 of them really mattered. His and Mina's. They were still high points, which still gave them a chance at victory, or at least making it to the next round, but if they lost them, they were out. Just then Katsuki felt his feet move further down into the ground than what should have happened. Looking down, he saw a portion of the ground was darker and now was acting like quicksand. Katsuki saw Aijiro, Mina, and Hanta also affected by this. Katsuki looked around, trying to find the source of it. What he found was a light blonde-haired boy with a jaw like something he's seen in a show before. To his side was a boy with crystal white hair and pitch-black skin. Slightly behind them were another 2 boys. One looked like a praying mantis, while the other had light brown hair and a sloppy and goofy grin. Katsuki held out in anger. He grabbed Aijiro and blasted himself and him backwards, but he couldn't get out of whatever trap he was in. He ended up just getting closer to Hanta and Mina. He watched as the black boy jumped into whatever mushy trap that the weird jaw boy created and seemingly disappeared, only for him to reappear centimeters from Mina with a terrifying grin. He grabbed her headband and was about to disappear, but yanked his away first. Katsuki also smashed an explosion in his face which spat an incredibly painful yell from the boy as he was thrown away. The force made the group of boys stop and hold the rope to make sure they wouldn't slow down. They continued to charge. Katsuki went to create an explosion, but the boy with the weird grin created an air shield to protect his team. It did little though as Ijiro quickly smashed it, allowing Katsuki to fire a direct explosion at them. Firing them away, the squad were forced out of the ground as whatever quirk was affecting them now was deactivated. However, the team still didn't have time to rest as Jirota and Mizo ran at them again from different angles. This infuriated Katsuki as it was clearly visible that they only had one headband left. Why were they still going for them? It was pissing him off. His hands hurt. He was tired, and the thought of his old life friends getting a shot at Yue was really wearing him down. To the point where all Katsuki saw was red. F off. Katsuki bellowed as he fired two large explosions at Jirota and Mizo. Denki had been observing what had been happening beneath them as nothing else was happening. He had thought about who could get them and only had a few people. Momo could make some stuff to fire at them, but it would just be a waste of resources as it wasn't even confirmed they would get Ochako's headband. Katsuki could fly up there, but him being tethered to 3 other people stopped that. A girl with horns from another hero class seemed to be able to fire them at the team, but she was quickly eliminated. The girl with vines for hair tried to get them, but Hitoshi and Denki moved just out of her reach. The only other person who could reach them was Fumikage with the use of Dark Shadow. But doing that would leave his team open, losing their strongest defense and greatest weapon. They were also incredibly far ahead of everyone else that it wasn't worth it. Denki cringed when Katsuki started going ape SHD and unleashing powerful explosions in an angry panic state. He turned to Hitoshi who was also observing, but more so Ochako to see if she was getting sick. Hey, should we help them? Denki asked, pointing down at Katsuki's team. He knew that there was probably nothing they could do, but he didn't like the fact they were being targeted so hard. They were his best friends. Hitoshi scoffed and shook his head. Seriously? Do you see the guy with explosions? If he is taken out, it makes our lives a whole lot easier, Hitoshi replied. Denki looked down sadly and nodded. He knew that would be the answer, but he didn't like it. It was smart. Katsuki was by far the most powerful and spectacle of the students. It was hardly a match. Young Bakugo is cooperating far better than I have ever seen him, Tashinori muses from his seat. Izumi had to agree. He is paying attention and worrying about his team. With them, he hardly gave them thought and just tried doing it himself. She frowned. She clearly sees why he was allowed to attend. He had changed dramatically while her group really hadn't. She was furious when she and the rest of her group were denied and Katsuki wasn't. It didn't make sense to her at the time. But after speaking with Nomi, one of the girls from the villain rehabilitation, she went. A clearer idea was formed in her head. She was just guilty. Nothing more. She hadn't changed, neither had her friends. That was the difference that allowed Katsuki into Yue. He certainly felt guilty, probably more so than any of them. But he changed, and made a huge attempt at it instead of moping or half-butting it like his sister. They hadn't spoken since the reveal that Izuku had all for one. But she knows that Katsuki avoids going home to see both his mother and sister. Where he goes, she has no clue. If she had to guess any place, it would be Izuku. When she got the second shot at Yue, would she see him? Would he be willing enough to face them? They hadn't seen him in well over 2 years now, but they just know he is out there. It upsets Izumi greatly, but she knows there is nothing she can do. Izuku will never forgive her, Katsuki will never forgive her, and more importantly, it will be hell. Come on. Kick his butt. You've got him cornered, just get him. Katsumi screamed from next to Izumi, who crawled into herself. She wanted to disappear, get away from her group of friends and family who just don't get it and refuse to blame themselves. Was this how Izuku felt? Katsuki wasn't thinking. He was just firing at whatever moved. He was becoming sloppy and tired. Although it meant his explosions were stronger from his sweat, it meant that they were a lot less controlled and way more likely to injure Katsuki. Mina, Ijiro, and Hanta all tried pulling him back, but clearly something snapped in him, and now he was just acting violently. Since he was their last headband, the group had to protect him. Mina climbed on top of Ijiro's shoulder and started spinning around. She flung acid all around, and basically created a moat and pools of acid which made reaching them extremely hard. But people kept trying. Katsuki was no more conscious than a bull when seeing movement. All he saw was red and was attacking with shrieks of yells that were meant to be battle cries. His hands were deeply throbbing, and he was barely standing. Sweat ran down his red face, and his lungs were puffing up and down rapidly. Yet Katsuki kept fighting. Izuku was almost in a panic when he saw what Katsuki was doing. He recognized that look Katsuki had and how he was acting. This violent nature was out of character for how Katsuki operated now that about everyone could tell something was up. Izuku, however, was the only one who knew exactly what it was. "Izabe, please relax. I'm sure it is not that bad," Himiko said to her boyfriend as he frantically pressed numbers on his phone. Izuku violently shook his head. No, Himiko, he's is going to kill himself if he keeps going," Izuku said as he tried calling Eraserhead, only for it to go past the rings. Katsuki had lost the clue on what was happening. He just knew he had his headband still, and was he going to protect it? Everything was a blue to Katsuki. Noises of voices were yelling, but he couldn't hear a single one. He kept popping up his Quirkin attack to make everyone F off. He was angry, and he hated it. He didn't want to feel this way. He wanted it to be over. Katsuki screamed when he felt two things grab his wrist. Pain erupted in him as his wrists were heavily damaged. He tried to pop some explosions out to save himself, but they were way too weak. But Katsuki was no quitter and kept fighting. Strong arms wrapped around him and attempted to hold him down, but Katsuki tried fighting back. He slammed his head on it and immediately regretted it, as whatever it was hard. But Katsuki couldn't lose. Those idiots were not allowed at UA. They did not get a free chance after failing the first time at redemption. He worked hard to make himself a better person while none of them had even got up from their Fing buttes to do squat. He wanted to hit them, throw explosions at their faces and yells obscenities at them. But right now he couldn't think, and the only thing he knew he was doing was fighting. "Bakugo, it is alright, bro. It is over. No one is attacking you anymore," he heard Ijiro say. Katsuki gasped, and it felt like everything rushed back into him. He could see again, not just red that had clouded his vision. He was on the ground with Ijiro gripping him tight and looking at him worriedly. He could see Cementos and Midnight also giving him a look of concern, and he hated it. But what he couldn't ignore was the immense amount of pain and exhaustion that he was feeling. Katsuki's rapid breathing slowly started to slow down. He let his eyes shut and the adrenaline stop attacking him and let him rest. He was exhausted and couldn't keep fighting. Katsuki was moments away from becoming unconscious when a last-second thought popped into his head. "Wait, did I hurt my team?" Eraserhead walked away from the booth. He had some time to waste while the injured students were patched up. The team battle was a lot more violent than what he would have thought. Katsuki was the main reason for that, but it looked like something happened. He thinks Katsuki may have had a panic attack from how he acted, but he couldn't be too sure. He just knows that when Jiroda and Mizo ran at them for the second time, Katsuki became 10 times more violent. But everyone was fine. He was impressed by Denki, Ochako, and Hitoshi. The trio using Hitoshi for an easy victory with Ochako's quirk. Very few of the students could actually reach them, and many of them realized that obtaining the 1 million points was impossible. But thinking about this stuff is the last thing Eraserhead wanted to do. Sitting next to Present Mike as he screamed in excitement about everything was wearing him down. He needed a coffee as well as some Panadol. "Shota," a cheery voice yelled. Eraserhead stopped his walk and threw his head back. He groaned, long and exasperatedly. His eyes were shut as he tried his best to tame himself and mentally prepare himself with this encounter. Slowly and begrudgingly, Eraserhead turned around and spotted Emmy, or otherwise known as Miss Joke, who was walking over to her. "Joke," Eraserhead said in a monotone voice. Emmy laughed and then flopped her hand down. She smirked up at the taller male and elbowed him in the side. "Oh, don't be so cold, Eraser. Besides, I hear you have a new student to take care of now." She winked, which made Eraserhead audible grunt, causing another laugh to vibrate from Miss Joke. "But I must ask, is he your son?" she asked. Eraserhead growled before turning around and stomping away. Emmy laughed and chased after him. He had been bothered by that fact by Izuku, Himiko, and several other staff members of UA. He doesn't need Emmy of all people to bother him about it. "Come on, Shota. Don't be such a sour puss." Emmy laughed while jogging to keep up with him. Katsuki had no clue where he was. He knew that he was on something that was trying to be comfortable, but was just too hard for its purpose. A bed. It didn't matter. He felt like SHD and his eyes and hands hurt. Katsuki stretched out and quickly pulled himself back in when he realized whatever he was laying on was small. He let out an annoyed growl. He definitely was on an infirmary bed. Katsuki quickly wiped his eyes. He placed a hand on the back of his bed and pushed himself up. Katsuki ummed. He felt exhausted. Finally finding the power within himself, he opened his eyes. He was indeed in the infirmary. Katsuki looked around and saw no one else was in there, not even Recovery Girl. Katsuki got up from the bed. His throat felt dry and he could feel his face burn. He had bandages on his palms, but none were covering his fingers. His hand aches, and he could only guess it was from his explosions. Katsuki growls and puts his hand on his face before sliding it down. He walked over to the sink and filled himself a cup of water. This is fine, isn't it? Katsuki shakes his head and quickly grabs his water and scoffs it down. He coughs and shakes his head. It wasn't enough, so he fills up his cup again. The door opens and Katsuki turns around to look at who enters. Recovery Girl came in with Ijiro behind her. She spotted Katsuki by the sink and gave him a warm smile. "Looks like you're up, sweetie. I'll be with you in a second," Recovery Girl said, and waved her arm over for the boy behind her. Katsuki looked up to his shark-toothed friend. Their eyes met and Ijiro gave him a blinding smile and gave Katsuki a thumbs up. Katsuki smiled at that. It was small but noticeable and nodded his head. He quickly turned away, though his guilt ate at him. He hardly remembers what happened near the end of the tug team battle. He just got so frustrated and angry that he just exploded. Katsuki could feel his fist clench in anger, but not at anyone, but at himself. He could have severely hurt someone, or at worse, killed them. He wanted to be better, but why is that task so hard? Katsuki didn't even register the part where he sat down and his fists went into his hair. Each hand took a handful, but he didn't pull it. Moments later, he felt a hand grip his shoulder. Katsuki turned around and saw that Ijiro was now right by him. Katsuki noticed the bit of tape around his neck and wondered if that was because of him. Ijiro was looking down at him with a slightly concerned expression that Katsuki didn't like. But Ijiro still had his bright smile on his face. Recovery Girl walked around. The sound of her tapping cane as she walked brought Katsuki's attention over to her. He looked down at the elderly nurse as she walked up to him. "Hello there, Bakugo. You got kind of hectic during that last event." Recovery Girl chuckled to herself, which made Katsuki frown and look away. "Your wrists are slightly fractured. I managed to heal most of it, but we'll need to do it one more time before you start the tournament event. You have half an hour until you found out who your matches are, so just come back to me before you start. You hear me, young man?" Recovery Girl said sternly. Katsuki rolled his eyes, but nodded. But something she said caught his attention. He stood up and looked at Ijiro. "We made it to the next round?" Katsuki asked. Ijiro smiled brighter and nodded his head. He started to walk out of the infirmary with Katsuki in tow. "Yeah man, we did. Although barely. Zero Bro didn't actually get in as he got the lowest place in the obstacle course out of us though, which SCKS," Ijiro said. Katsuki felt another twinge of guilt attack him at that. Hanta saved his but so many times and was probably the reason why they didn't lose on so many occasions in that event. Ijiro elbows Katsuki, gaining his attention. Katsuki growls and looks over to the spiky red head, who is looking at him sympathetically. "Hey bro, it isn't your fault. You're the reason why we even got into the next round. And hey, everyone is really worried about you, you know?" Ijiro said with a smile. Katsuki's eyes widened at the last part. Everyone was worried about him. Why? He was screaming and yelling and firing explosions with little worry about his surroundings. He could have badly hurt them. Katsuki lowered his head in shame. Yeah, Ijiro is probably only saying that to pity him, to make him feel better. But Katsuki didn't like the feeling of guilt and shame, so for the time being, he pushed it to the side. "So, who else made it to the next round?" Katsuki finally asked as he and Ijiro walked into the cafeteria. Katsuki and the rest of the finalists walk out into the stadium. Loud applause scream in excitement. Katsuki forced them out as he just finds them annoying. Only 16 students get to make into the tournament round, so in theory these are the best of the best. He noticed that most of them were from his class, -4. 3 of them were from the other hero course, while the last one was from general studies. He didn't exactly know what that boy's quirk was, as Ochako and Denki refused to tell anyone, but Katsuki wasn't that scared of him. Not saying that the boy's quirk was weak. Probably the opposite, but seeing how it made Ochako float herself and two others for more than 10 minutes. It isn't raw power, and Katsuki can quickly overwhelm him. Izuku and Himiko are still watching from the television in one of the security rooms. The people in the tournaments are close to which Izuku expected, but it does show the capabilities that each student has in teamwork. The students who made it are Denki, Hitoshi, Ochako, Tenya, Momo, Fyoki, Mei, Mizo, Yu, Fumikage, Itsuka, Jiroda, Ibara, Katsuki, Ijiro, and Mina. All of them are strong and capable students, and Izuku agrees that they all deserve that place in the final event. But they aren't necessarily the strongest. Izuku knows he isn't supposed to be biased or judge others on strength, but even he knows that others are stronger. If Izuku were to pick the top 16 strongest students, Itsuka, Mei and Fyoki would all be replaced. Nito, Reiko and Setsuna from Class 1B Izuku believes are in the top 16 in terms of strength. But it is more than just strength and determination that depicts how far someone will get in a competition. But Izuku is curious on who will win. Obviously more so as whoever wins will fight against his tormentors. Izuku growls at the thought and Himiko immediately snuggles up to him to comfort him. If Izuku had to guess who the winner would be, he would say Katsuki. But there is a chance a surprise victory could be made. But would Izuku want that? Does he want Katsuki to win to fight the people who he left behind 2 years ago? Izuku is stuck in a moral zone and trying to decipher who would be the best candidate to fight Izumi and her gang, or letting the flow go. Izuku feels like, for his own sanity, see who would be the best pick. What would he do after that? Help that person win and give them pointers on how to beat the 4 challengers. Izuku would have to sabotage, and he can't do that. He's supposed to be the teacher of these students. What would that tell them if he picked a favorite to win the tournament? Izuku slumps in his couch and holds Himiko close. He feels like CRP right now, and there isn't any way to fix it. Not until everything has sorted itself out. All Izuku can do is wait. The students all walked up to the board, their next match results up. Katsuki looks for his name so he can locate his opponent. He spots his name in the first slot, which means his fight is up first. Katsuki internally groans at that before audibly groaning when he sees his opponent. Ochako Uraraka. Katsuki Bakugo vs. Ochako Uraraka. Mizo Shoji vs. Jiroda Shishida. Momo Yaoyorozu vs. Fumikage Tokoyami. Ijiro Kirishima vs. Fyoki Nanami. Tenya Ida vs. Mei Hatsum. Itsuka Kendo vs. Hitoshi Shinso. Mina Ishido vs. Ibara Shiozaki. Denki Kaminari vs. Su Ajui. Katsuki looked around for the Ochako in the small crowd around him. He spotted her already looking at him. The 2 teens stared at each other from over the group. But then, Katsuki smirked and walked over to her. "You better bring it round, cheeks, because I'm not going easy." Katsuki laughed as he looked at her. Ochako looked stunned for a second before smirking in return, staring at Katsuki with fire in her eyes. "Don't get too confident, Kakin. I may surprise you by kicking your butt." Ochako laughed and tapped his chest. Katsuki scoffed and folded his arms. "Doubt I'd be surprised, but that doesn't make fighting you any easier," Katsuki said. Hitoshi looked at the board. He was the 6th match out of the 8. Hitoshi didn't know who he was up against, but he's glad it wasn't that Bakugo guy or the boy with a sentient shadow for a quirk. But he didn't know who this Itsuka Kendo was. He was looking in the crowd and tried listening for the name, but couldn't get anything. He then spotted a flash of bright yellow jump next to a boy with spiky red hair. Hitoshi sighed. As he walked over to Denki, he grabbed his shirt sleeve and pulled him away. Denki was shocked and looked over to Hitoshi, but he quickly smiled when he saw it was the sleep-deprived teen. "Hey Shinso, what do you need?" Denki asked with a bright smile. Hitoshi mumbled in displeasure and looked to the board. "Who's Kendo?" Hitoshi asked. Denki shrugged before turning around. Hitoshi looked at the boy oddly and saw that they were looking at a group of 3. A girl with orange hair tied in a ponytail and was quite muscular. An extremely hairy brunette boy with glasses and a serious-looking girl with vines for hair. "Hey, which one of you guys are Kendo?" Denki asked. The group of 3 turned to him and Hitoshi. Hitoshi visibly tensed as focus was now on him. The girl with orange hair smiled and walked over to them. "That's me, and I'm guessing you're Shinso," Kendo said, her hands placed at her hips. Hitoshi nodded. "That is correct," he replied. "All right, everyone, go back to your booths." The first round will start very shortly. Present Mike shouted. Everyone looked over the announcer box where Present Mike sat before quickly resuming what they were doing. I would wish good luck to you, but you are my opponent. Itsuka smiled before heading back. That sentence actually put a small smile on Hitoshi's face for the humor. Katsuki had to exit quickly as he had to head back to Recovery Girl. He wanted his fight to at least be second, but he'll have to deal with what he's got. Ochako and Katsuki were greeted by blaring cheers and roars from the crowd. Light blinded them, but they kept walking strong. The two found each other's gaze and gave each other a SHD eating grin. Ochako did notice the bandages still present on Katsuki's palm. She cringed at that and knew that Katsuki wasn't at 100%. But despite that, she knew he would still give it his all. Who was she to not do the same? Don't mention the fact that he would blow her but up if she didn't give 100%. On the left is the boy with the personality matching his explosive quirk, Katsuki Bakugo. On the right is who I'm personally rooting for, the victor of both previous events, so she is certainly a force to be reckoned with. Ochako Uraraka. Present Mike announces. The two shook each other's hands before backing away from each other. Katsuki did more than Ochako to give himself space. Midnight yelled out to the crowd to hype them up, which the happily did by cheering even louder than before. All right, you two stallions. You may fight now? Midnight yelled, flailing her arms up and down. On that mark, Ochako instantly sprinted forward. Katsuki stood back and got into a stance, both hands out in front and waiting to rip out sparks of an explosion. Ochako kept running, but Katsuki wasn't attack. She knew what he was doing. Ochako needed to touch Katsuki for her quirk to work. On almost anyone else, that would be an instant victory. But Katsuki is the one other student with the capability to fly. Her floating ability won't instantly take him out. It will greatly affect him and he will lose a lot of control, but he'll still be able to fight. But the problem is that Katsuki knows that as well. He is luring in Ochako close because she needs to get in close before blasting her away. There is a risk, but he is taking it. He can't afford to get tired quickly in this fight. Ochako is closing the gap. She stretches out her hand in hopes of grasping Katsuki, but he takes a step back and throws his hand up. A crackle, then a boom shakes from his palm, creating a flash of light and smoke. But what he didn't expect was for Ochako to come rolling out on the left. Instantly, she sprung back up and charged at Katsuki again. Katsuki swore and let out a panicked explosion in her direction. But to his surprise and annoyance, Ochako was already right back on him. He swiped at her again with an explosion, but Ochako managed to avoid it. Katsuki released a second one and knocked her to the ground. He then attacked her with two hands and launched her away. But the problem was now smoke covered most of Katsuki's surrounding area. Katsuki kept turning around, waiting for Ochako to jump out and attack him. Katsuki saw a shadow in his peripheral vision. Quickly turning, he saw it pounce out, and he quickly attacked it. But Katsuki realized what he just blew up was a shirt. Katsuki heard footsteps rush up behind him. Acting quickly, he pointed his hands to the floor and let out a large explosion, blowing himself off the ground. He heard Ochako scream as she flew away. Katsuki grunted as he felt his hands coil and grind in discomfort. But he pressed on. He landed back on the ground and let out a groan of pain as he felt his legs give out from underneath him at the impact. But Katsuki was not one to be deterred and stood back up. He had pushed the heavy smoke away from him with his previous explosion, but a thin line of gray still covered the area. Katsuki spotted Ochako sprinting back to him, her bright red. She was now sporting no shirt, just a black singlet as Katsuki had blown it up. Katsuki turned to her and prepared his palms. They hurt like hell, so he couldn't fully unleash explosions if he didn't want to injure himself. Katsuki also ran forward. He pointed his hand at the ground and activated his quirk. Rubble shot up, and it made Ochako stop. He then pointed his other hand at her directly and let out an explosion. Ochako screamed as she tumbled back. Katsuki cringed and turned his head away but kept his eyes on the girl. She rolled on her back until finally uncurling on her stomach. Ochako groaned but got back up, albeit shakily. "Oh, come on, finish this." Katsuki heard a voice yell from the crowd. "Stop playing with her, you butt," another voice yelled. Katsuki stopped what he was doing and looked away from Ochako. Several parts of the crowd were booing him, which set Katsuki off. Why? What the hell had he done? He was being cautious because if he wasn't, he'd lose. "Shut the F up, shitbags." Katsuki shouted up at them. The booing crowd stopped and looked at Katsuki, stunned at his outburst. His old friends also looked at him, confused at his outburst into the crowd. "Are you a hero?" Eraserhead voice said in a dangerously low voice over the speakers, making the crowd freeze. "If you couldn't tell what he was doing, then you probably shouldn't be here. So I suggest you leave before you make yourself look like a bigger fool," Eraserhead said in a dangerous tone. Katsuki managed to spot the idiot who started this. His face looked scared and horrified as he sat back down. Katsuki couldn't help but laugh. He then turned back to Ochako, who was now on her feet and smiling over at him. "Thank you, Kaken," she said. Katsuki nodded his head. He then watched as Ochako straightened her posture and held her hands close together, her fingertips almost touching. "For not underestimating me," she said before slamming her fingertips together. Katsuki was confused, but that quickly turned into concern. He knows what that was. It was Ochako deactivating her quirk. But the problem was that Katsuki didn't know what she had it even activated on. So he looked up. Large pieces of stone were tumbling down from the air. Katsuki gasped at them all, and it seemed like the crowd finally noticed that as well. One rock was low to the ground, and Katsuki barely had enough time to move out of the landing on his back to do so. Ochako was running towards him, dodging stones on the way. But she wasn't in that bad of a zone. All of the rocks were directly above Katsuki. He didn't have time to run, and he couldn't blow them up. That would only crack them and create dust clouds above him that would prevent him from seeing. So Katsuki only had one option, and he didn't really like that option. His hands were already fed, and they were on fire. But he had to do something. So biting his losses, Katsuki pointed both of his palms up. To his advantage, large amounts of unused sweat was still there as he had to hold back to prevent himself from injuring his hand. But that only means he is going to hurt his hand more now. Ochako was getting in close, so close that she could almost touch him. Katsuki didn't have any more time to wait. So taking in one last deep breath, he unleashed a powerful explosion. The explosion spread all above him and took out every rock in sight. The blast was strong enough that a gust of wind was felt by the crowd. The shockwave that Ochako felt was so strong she was sent flying back, and she hit the ground hard. Katsuki didn't have a much better time as his blast pushed him onto the ground. Katsuki yelled as he felt his left hand crack, but he kept pushing. He turned to face Ochako, who was laying face down on the ground. He could see her struggling, trying to desperately push herself up, but couldn't. After 5 seconds, she succumbed to exhaustion and gave out. Uraraka and incapacitated. Bakugo is the winner, Midnight yelled. Although Katsuki had won, he didn't feel like it. His hands hurt like hell, and Ochako was unconscious on the ground. Katsuki grunted in pain as he forced himself onto his feet. He wanted to help Ochako, but his hands hurt too much, so Midnight helped her get on a sling for the medbots to take her away. Katsuki followed them out, holding his hands up to his chest as he did so. He ignored the yells of the audience. All right, we have the match of two opposing titans from different classes up next. On the left, standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 110 kilograms. It's Mizo Shoji from Class 1A with arms equivalent to a brick wall. On the right is the literal beast of Class 1B, standing at 5 feet 11 inches and weighing 90 kilograms, is Jiroda Shishida? Present Mike announces. Two behemoths of 14-year-olds walk out on the field. Each of them have a neutral expression but fire present in their eyes. They shake each other's hand and wish each other luck. Midnight stands on her podium and prepares herself to start the battle. All right, you two giants, you may fight now? Midnight yells. At her words, Jiroda instantly throws his shirt off. Mizo sprints to him and holds his arms in front of him. As soon as his shirt is off, Jiroda grows in size. Becoming 5 feet 10 inches to 7 foot, Jiroda roars before leaping over to his opponent. He raises his arm over his head and quickly slams it down onto Mizo. The action stops Mizo in his tracks as he braces. But Mizo doesn't move, he holds strong. Mizo's two real arms reel back, and he starts wailing on Jiroda's stomach. The beast groans and attempts to swat Mizo from the side. But Mizo is quick. Using his left arm, he vaults over the attack and extends his other arm to deliver a harsh blow to the giant's face. Jiroda roars and flings Mizo up into the air. But this hardly affects the white-haired teen. He does a flip and glides back down with his webbed arms. Jiroda, becoming infuriated races towards his opponent and gives everything he has on Mizo. Mizo either blocks it with his arm or manages to avoid it, which is miraculous considering Mizo's size and Jirota's speed. Mizo is knocked to the ground and forced to take the defensive, and Jirota gives everything that he has. But in a slide of genius, Mizo uses his multiple hands to grab Jirota's arms. Now the boy does not lack power, but in his state, his is incredibly stupid. He easily lifts Mizo off the ground, but it takes him a second to register it. Mizo, using this opportunity, drops onto Jirota's head. The beast drops to his stomach with a wail of pain. But he wasn't out but hurt. Mizo wasn't one to hesitate, however. He pulls his arm up and strikes down on the head of his opponent hard. So hard that the force results in the ground around Jirota's head to break. Jirota shrunk back to his regular size. His tongue hung out of his mouth. Midnight blew a whistle and raised her arm. Shishida is incapacitated. Shoji is the winner. Midnight screamed in excitement. Mizo nodded his head as the crowd cheered. He bent down and put Jirota's limp arm around his shoulder. He then proceeded to help the boy out of the stadium. Coming in on the left is a recommendation student of 1A and is their class vice president, Momo Yaoyorozu. On the right is mysterious boy who lurks in the shadows, Fumikage Tokoyami. Present Mike shouted. The two students of 1A walked out of the field. Momo smiled but did nothing else. Fumikage walked with his head held high. He knew many people would be looking at him because of his strange appearance, but he had learned a long time ago to ignore it. Fumikage and Momo shook hands before walking away from each other. All right, kids, when I say go, go. Ready, go? Midnight yelled. Now Momo can create things incredibly fast, but unfortunately for her, Dark Shadow is faster. There was at least a 100-meter distance between her and Fumikage. Dark Shadow managed to make that distance in less than 2 seconds. Momo squealed in surprise. She quickly made a shield to defend herself, but the force of Dark Shadow pushed her far back. Dark Shadow was not yet satisfied and kept on pounding on Momo's shield. All this time, Fumikage was just running to the action. Momo created a staff and tried hitting Dark Shadow, but he just grabbed it with his shadowy claw and tossed it away. Momo was losing, and she was losing fast. Without much time left, she tossed her hand up and created fire. The light from it made Dark Shadow back off, but only for a moment. Her arm now had burns, but she ignored it. Fumikage came rushing in and instantly started wrestling with the shield. He pushed it out of the way, and Dark Shadow swooped back in and grabbed her stomach. Momo yelled as she was shoved to the ground. Not wanting to give up so easily, she created firecrackers and tossed them in the air. They exploded, and the light forced Dark Shadow away. The shadow bird hissed in displeasure and sped away, leaving Momo alone. Looking back up, she saw that Dark Shadow had retreated back to Fumikage and wasn't coming to attack her again. At that, she created another staff. Yaoyorozu is out of bounds. Tokoyami wins. Midnight yells. Momo blinks in confusion. She looks around herself and sees that she is sitting on the boundary line. She had lost, hardly even a fight, and was overwhelmed. Momo dropped her head in shame. She stood up and hurriedly exited the stadium. Fumikage felt bad for Momo, but couldn't do anything as she was too far away. So he walked out of the stadium as well. Next up we have Class 1, a second recommendation student. Fyoki Nanami on the left, and she is fighting against Class 1, A's definition of manliness, Ijiro Kirishima. Present Mike yells. The two kids walk up to each other where Midnight stands and waits for them. They give each other a handshake before backing away. Midnight looks between the two of them, her mischievous grin standing on her lips. You two can fight in 3, 2, 1, go. Midnight yelled. Instantly a wave of heat washed over Ijiro before he even had a chance to harden himself. He coughed at that, but he charged forward. Fyoki concentrated her heat into a beam and fired it at Ijiro. Even though he was hardened, his skin was being burned and he kept having to pat his body where fire was being created. But he wasn't slowing down. Fyoki then had to focus more on combat than her quirk as Ijiro clearly had the defenses to take it easily. She pushed a punch from Ijiro away before swinging him around. But Ijiro was just as strong for her and chopped her in the shoulder. Fyoki tried to fight, which she did well in. She was the better fighter out of the two, but Ijiro's quirk just made it impossible for her to hurt him. She got knocked to the ground, and before Ijiro could pin her, she raised her arms up. I surrender. You win. She breathes exasperatedly. Midnight raises her hands. Nanami has surrendered, making Kirishima the winner. She calls, getting shouts of excitement from the audience. Ijiro helps Fyoki up and they walk out of the stadium together. Our next student one the left comes from a line of notorious heroes, Tenya Ida. The person on the right is actually a support course student. Now that's something you only see every few years. It's Mei Hatsum. Present Mike yelled. Mei came out with a brilliant smile. She certainly was a character. Her eyes zooming in on certain people in the crowd. Her face dirty from smoke and ash as well as her clothes. She also had small bits of equipment, but nothing major. Izuku was curious as to where the rest of her stuff had gone. Until Tenya had walked out. The blue-haired speedster stumbled out. He was completely decked out in different equipment. A jet pack, boots, something around the waist, a vest. He had way too many things going on. Many people laughed at Tenya from his ridiculous get-up and how much he was visibly struggling. The two went up, but Midnight stopped Tenya as it was taking him too long to get to the middle. She looked over Tenya questioningly. She raised an eyebrow over to Mei, who was just smiling widely. Midnight shook her head. She rose her arm. You two may fight now? Midnight yelled. Tenya instantly tried to race and attack Mei, but doing so was hard with all of the stuff he was wearing. Mei easily dodged. But what was surprising was that Mei pulled out a microphone from her pocket. She tapped on it, and the speakers of the stadium registered it. What's going on? Present Mike asked. Hello, everybody. Mei yelled into the microphone, which somehow was picked up by the speakers. Izuku and Himiko started laughing from their room. No way. Did she hack into the speaker systems? Izuku asked with a laugh. Himiko giggled next to him. That's hilarious, she said. Mei then gestured over to Tenya Ida. I am Mei Hatsum, and these are a few of my inventions. She yelled out, then pressed a button. The first one is my steel zipped net, she announced, and all of a sudden, Tenya's legs got caught in a green-tinted net. He tried getting out, but the net was solid. As you can, the net is immovable, unless you heat it up. Flamethrower, for example. Mei yelled out. All of a sudden, a large blast of flames erupted from Tenya's pelvis, which scared the poor teen. After a few seconds, the flames calmed back down. Now the net can be moved, but it still isn't easy, Mei said cheekily. Tenya grunted as he wiggled his way out of the net. He then turned around and started to charge at Mei. His ears were bright red from embarrassment, and he was infuriated with the pink-haired girl. But that isn't all, folks. Because I have both hover boots and a jetpack, Mei announced with a gleeful smile. She pressed a button, and the next thing Tenya knew was that he was flying in the air. Tenya yelled out in fright before desperately trying to correct himself and stop flying away. As you can see, a first-time flyer has great control over these contraptions. Mei yelled. Tenya, while she was speaking to the crowd, tried to land. However, he spun and slammed his head into the ground. A loud chorus of oohs and ahs were sounded in the audience at the impact from Tenya. Maybe not for landing, though, Mei admitted. Tenya groaned as he laid on the ground, utterly humiliated. He held his head with his hands and curled himself up into a ball. That's all from me, everybody. But remember my name, Mei Hatsum, as you'll hear a lot more of it in the future, Mei said. She waved at the crowd before forfeiting and walking over the line. Hatsum has forfeited, making Ida the victor, Midnight yelled. Tenya just groaned. Medbots ended up coming and placed him on a stretcher, taking him out of the arena. Coming in from the left is Class 1B's class president, Itsuka Kendo. Now on the right, a real treat and surprise. He is a mysterious boy all the way from General Studies. The first student from General Studies in over 14 years to make it into the tournament. Hitoshi Shinso. Present Mike announced. Hitoshi and Itsuka walked to each other. They shook each other's hands, but did not wish each other good luck. They walked back to their positions on the field. Itsuka got into a fighting stance while Hitoshi stood lazily with his hands in his pockets. All right, you two can fight when I say, go. Midnight yelled after a small pause. Itsuka smiled as she slowly approached Hitoshi. Hitoshi did not move as he waited for her to move. So what's your quirk? Must be pretty good to make it this far, Itsuka stated. Hitoshi smirked as he raised his hands from out of his pockets. He smiled sadistically and reached his hand out to her and curled his fingers. Oh, can you guess what it is, Kendo? Tick, tock, Hitoshi said with a low chuckle. Itsuka's eyes widened. She was slightly unnerved, but still extremely confused, as she had no clue what Hitoshi's quirk was. but then started panicking as Hitoshi moved away and his hand stretched out towards her was starting to shake. Whatever was going to happen soon. She was running on borrowed time, and she can't afford the risk of waiting anymore. So Itsuka charged forward. Hitoshi smirked, but kept it hidden from her. "It won't matter if I defeat you fast," Itsuka stated. "But you've already lost," Hitoshi said quietly, his voice not heard from the ginger. Itsuka reeled back her right hand before punching, enlarging it as she does so. But Hitoshi expected that. He did watch everyone from above while he was floating with Denki and Ochako. So he knew exactly what her quirk was. Hitoshi jumped back and put his hand on her large one. "Stop," he commanded. The audience was silent as they wondered what made the purple-haired boy say that. Hitoshi smirked and put his hands in his pockets. Kenda stayed still, not moved from her position when Hitoshi took control. The audience was also confused. They thought he was conceding, but why had the girl not moved? Hitoshi walked next to her and smiled. "Go on, lose for me, will you?" he asked but commanded at the same time. Itsuka deactivated her quirk and started walking to the boundary line. She stepped over, and as soon as she did, Hitoshi deactivated his quirk. Kenda stepped over the boundary line. "Shinso is the winner," Midnight announced. Hitoshi nodded his head before turning around. He expected the audience to yell at him and call him a villain for his quirk. Everyone had always called him that. He put his hands back in his pockets and lowered his head, walking back through the way he came. "Woo! Way to go, Shinso!" He heard a voice shout excitedly. Confused and slightly stunned, Hitoshi looked up. At the top was his class, all looking down at him. They all had smiles. "Great job, dude. You showed them. You totally can win this," his class had shouted. Hitoshi was surprised at the praises he was getting from his classmates. He didn't. Heavy slap. And Katsuki jumps back, but is still hit. Katsuki shouts in pain as his entire body is flung away. Katsuki spins in the air. He hits the ground roughly, but gets back up and fires explosions from his palms away from Mizo. He can't beat the man in an open area head-to-head. His hands are already on fire, and the sheer speed of him despite him being significantly larger than Katsuki proves it to be almost impossible for Katsuki to take him out. So he'll go for a different way. Katsumi scoffs. "Coward," she mutters under her breath. Katsuki looks back and sees Mizo chasing him. Good. Katsuki thinks. He needs to get him away from the center. When Mizo gets close, Katsuki unleashes a massive explosion followed by a barrage of them. Mizo still walks out of the smoke, lunging at Katsuki, but he was prepared. Katsuki ducks down, getting real low, and sends an explosion at the back of Mizo's legs. The force makes him fall to the ground with a harsh thud. At that, Katsuki quickly jumps and blows himself up into the air. Once he was about 100 meters up, he started spinning. He opened his palms and let the air drag in them as he built up speed. This was a technique that Katsuki had yet to perfect, but he had been learning. But the idea is that he could build air up in his palm by spinning incredibly fast in the air. The resulting blast will be incredibly powerful if he could get it to work. But Katsuki wasn't good enough at it yet. He calls it howitzer impact. Katsuki can barely see where he is going, but he does manage to spot Mizo's stationary figure and the ground approaching at an alarming rate. Not trusting Katsuki's ability to not kill himself, he sent his explosion out early. A large explosion erupted from Katsuki's palm, and a wave of crackling power and smoke launched itself all the way down to Mizo. Mizo shouted in distress, but Katsuki couldn't tell if he had won. He could feel his right palm burn and twinge in pain, but he bit his tongue. The smoke started to clear, and Katsuki's eyes widened. The idiot was still standing. Katsuki just angrier at that. Don't get him wrong. Mizo looked badly hurt. His arms were raised out in front of him and looked badly burned. He was breathing heavily and obviously trying to catch up with himself. But Katsuki was now just set off. Katsuki instantly launched himself at Mizo. Mizo saw this and was prepared to use that momentum against him, but Katsuki wasn't an idiot. He put out his hands in front of him and sent an explosion. Mizo's eyes widened as smoke now surrounded his vision. Mizo created eyes from his quirk and lifted them up so he could still see. Katsuki slammed his knee right into Mizo's blocked arms, but it only shoved the boy back a little bit. But Katsuki did not stop. He started pounding explosions after explosions at Mizo in hopes to find victory. Every explosion, Mizo just took, standing with his arms over him and protecting himself. He was starting to wince though as his arms were looking badly injured. But Mizo was just waiting for his opportunity. Once he saw Katsuki starting to struggle, he retaliated. Mizo put his arm down and uppercut Katsuki. Katsuki yelled as the force brought him into the air, and he was knocked back a few feet away. He landed on his back and growled in pain. He was about to blow himself away, but the sound of Midnight's whistle stopped him. He looked over to the 18-plus heroine and saw that one of her arms was raised. Shoji has been pushed out of bounds. Bakugo is the winner. Midnight yelled. Katsuki's eyes widened before he looked down at Mizo's feet. Mizo did the same thing. Midnight was right. Mizo's left foot was slightly over the line. Katsuki laughed out a gargled breath and shakily got up. Mizo looked down sadly but did not look defeated. He created a mouth and extended over to Katsuki as he walked over to the boy. That was a good match, Bakugo, Mizo said in his mysterious tone of voice. Katsuki grunted and nodded his head. He saw that Mizo was now right in front of him and had his hand out extended. Katsuki cringed, knowing both of his hands were fed. But he didn't want to seem like in front of an entire audience. Don't shake too hard, and yeah. You were rough, you tanky F, Katsuki gasped shakily as he cautiously grabbed Mizo's hand. It wasn't a firm or rough handshake, but incredibly soft. Not matching either of the boys, but what can Katsuki do? His hands hurt like hell. Our next match is going to be brutal, folks. On the left is Sharp Brick with teeth of a great white, Ijiro Kirishima. Then on the left, the Raven of Darkness and a shadow with an attitude, Fumikage Tokoyami. Present Mike announced. Both boys entered the stadium, Ijiro with a bright smile. They shook each other's hands before walking back over to their spots in the stadium. Midnight raises her hand. All right, you two, the fighting may commence. Now, Midnight yelled. Dark Shadow instantly fires out towards Ijiro. Ijiro instantly hardens himself and blocks Dark Shadow's headbutt. But the force stops Ijiro from advancing. Ijiro delivers an elbow directly onto Dark Shadow's head, which knocks the Shadow Beast to the ground. Ijiro then tries running over to Fumikage, but Dark Shadow's claw manages to get a hold on Ijiro's leg, tripping the boy. Dark Shadow constantly gets in Ijiro's face and slaps Ijiro, knocking him around a bit. Ijiro constantly knocks Dark Shadow away and advances towards Fumikage. But Dark Shadow is a person and doesn't have stamina like what a person would do, as its ability solely relies on Fumikage's mood and the light. But Ijiro is human and therefore gets tired. Since Fumikage constantly moves around and Dark Shadow's constant ability of stalling the red head, exhaustion washes over Ijiro. Eventually, it is enough where Dark Shadow zooms at Ijiro. It grabs the boy's waist and flies him over to the boundary line, shoving him out. Ijiro has been shoved out of bounds, leaving Tokoyami the winner. Midnight shouts. The match was quite boring as it was just a basic brawl. But Fumikage was smart and stayed away until Ijiro could no longer run at the raven-headed boy. Alright everyone, here on the left is a speedster and the president of Class 1A, Tenya Ida. Then on the right is the underdog from General Education with the ability to control the minds of others, Hitoshi Shinso. Present Mike shouted. The two boys walked into the stadium. Tenya with a very serious expression while Hitoshi had a very bored expression. The two shook hands before walking back to their spots in the ground. Midnight laughed and waved her hands. You two ready? Midnight asked and Tenya stiffly nodded his head and Hitoshi gave a lazy smirk. Are you going to make a fool out of yourself, Robo? Hitoshi asked smugly. Tenya's face turned red and his expression turned into one of anger. Quite. That is none of your concern, Tenya stated angrily, which got an amused chuckle out of Hitoshi. Fight! Midnight shouted at the two. Hitoshi kept his smile up as he already knew he won. But Tenya didn't know. In a flash, Tenya was launching himself at Hitoshi at high speeds. This did catch Hitoshi off guard as he felt his shoulders roughly being grabbed. Hitoshi suddenly panicked as he was being pushed at an alarming rate. Hitoshi grunted and took control of Tenya. Stop! Hitoshi screamed. The crowd gasped at the display and watched as Tenya and Hitoshi went from going at over 80 kilometers an hour to a sudden halt. Hitoshi took a breath, but as he looked down, he saw he was centimeters away from the boundary line. Hitoshi, understand. Everyone hated him before for his quirk. Why wasn't that happening here? Hitoshi couldn't lie. The praises certainly felt good. He smiled and nodded his head, but still kept his head down. For the first time since he was 4, he wasn't worried about what people thought about his quirk. Coming in from the left is the alien girl with a bright personality, Mina Ishido. And in from the right is the botanist of the hero course, Ibra Shiozaki. Present, Mike yelled. Mina skipped in from her side of the stadium, while Ibra walked in with a bored expression, making Mina frown. The girls shook hands and got into position. Mina bent down and placed her hands in the ground, while Ibra didn't move. All right, girls, I want a clean fight. Go. Midnight yelled. Mina instantly started flying forward. Ibra sent her vines into the ground. One by one, they shot out and slapped at Mina. They did hurt, but Mina powered through. They attempted to hold her, but Mina burned through them with zero trouble. The vines then started shifting in the ground, which made Mina slow down. She slid backwards to avoid a sweep of vines, and a herd that all came up and attacked at once. But Mina kept powering through. As she closed in on Ibra, she slapped her hands together, one on top of the other. Mina fired a hose of acid. It was direct on course, but a wall of vines came in front of Ibra. But the acid still ate through the vines and reached the other side. But Ibra was not standing on the other side. The ground rumbled from underneath Mina, which made her pause. That proved to have been a crucial mistake. Tons of vines broke out of the ground and attacked Mina. She yelled out in fright as she was lifted into the air. Mina tried to burn her way through the vines, but she was not fast enough as the vines kept coming back. She was thrown in the air at fast speed and hit the wall of the stadium. Ishido is out of bounds, leaving Shiozaki as the winner, Midnight yelled. Ibra bowed before quickly leaving the stadium. Mina groaned as she forced herself onto her feet. Hitting the wall really hurt her back. She limped out of the arena, holding her back in pain. For the final match in the first round, we have the electric whiz on the left, Denki Kaminari. He is facing up against the cool and collected girl from the pond on the right. See you, Ajui. Present, Mike yelled. Denki walked into the stadium with a wide smile and waved to the crowd. Tsu walked in with a plain expression as she looked over to her goofy classmate. They shook each other's hand before hopping back to their spots. Final match, guys. Do your best. Go. Midnight shouted. Tsu instantly started hopping circles around Denki as he fired up his electricity. Both parties knew that Denki would win. Tsu can't attack him without shocking herself, and she has no defense to save her. But she'll give Denki a challenge. Tsu was hopping around fast, giving Denki a difficult time in tracking her. When Denki didn't have eyes on her, she leapt into the air and way over his head. She flung her tongue down at him as she moved across the air. Denki managed to spot her when she went airborne. He looked up and saw a flying pink appendage swooping down at him. Denki surged his electricity into his muscles to move faster. He dodged the tongue and managed to catch it. While he had a hold of it, Denki sent a shock of electricity running through it. Tsu buzzed with yellow light and let out a gurgled scream as Denki had her tongue pinched. She flopped to the ground, twitching a bit from aftershock. I think it is safe to conclude that Kaminari is the winner, Midnight said, concerned about Tsu. Denny nodded his head before speeding towards the injured frog girl. He helped her up and walked her over to the approaching medbots. He helped her on the stretcher and watched as the robots rolled out. Denki quickly jogged out of the stadium. Katsuki Bakugo versus Mizo Shoji. Eijiro Kirishima versus Fumikage Tokoyami. Tenya Ida versus Hitoshi Shinso. Denki Kaminari versus Ibra Shiozaki. Katsuki sat in the infirmary with his hands behind his head. Tsu was just wheeled in after being shocked by Denki, but she wouldn't be in her for too long. He was here since he fed his hands up quite badly. With the time, Recovery Girl was able to heal him, but if he went to hard again, they'd break. Unfortunately, that is a confirmed outcome if Katsuki wants to win, as his opponent is Mizo. He hasn't fought the boy before, but he has hit him with some explosions and watched him fight. The guy's a tank and practically an unbreakable wall. He's seen the guy take hits that would snap other people in half, like that Beast Boy from Class 1C. Katsuki has hit Mizo in the face with an explosion during the tug team event, but he still got back up afterwards. That either knocks someone out or stuns someone so bad that they can't properly function. Mizo kept fighting like his explosion pinched him. That was his face. Katsuki hates to see how little his explosions will do if he hit the boy's arms. Recovery Girl came walking back in and looked over to Katsuki. You're up now, Bakugo. I would tell you to try and be cautious, but knowing you and how tough your opponent will be, I'll see you in here again. Recovery Girl sighed. Katsuki grunted and nodded his head, thanking the elderly nurse. He looked over to Ochako, who was still on a bed with a wet towel over her forehead. "Good luck, Kaken," she said with a smile. Katsuki gave a soft smile in returning and nodded his head. "Thanks, I'll need it," Katsuki replied before exiting. Katsuki walked to the stadium and held up his hands. They still felt really tough, and the bandages just felt restricting. He clenched his fists tight and looked up in determination. He wasn't doing this for himself. This was to make sure those four didn't get a shot at even being a hero. He was going to make sure of that, for his and mostly Izuku's sake. On the left comes the Tsar Bomb as a person, Katsuki Bakugo. His opponent on his right is a person with the strength of a bomb, Mizo Shoji. Present Mike shouted. Katsuki and Mizo walked up to each other. Katsuki shook Mizo's hand before backing up, backing a far way back. Midnight looked between the two boys before raising her hand. "Next fight is here now. Don't kill each other, boys. Fight!" Midnight screamed, whipping her hand down. Mizo instantly charged at Katsuki, and in reaction, Katsuki took to the air. He zoomed himself to Mizo, who stopped and raised his arm. Katsuki quickly changed course and popped himself to go over the top of Mizo. Katsuki pointed his hand at the back of Mizo's head and sparked his palm. A flash of light followed by smoke completely covered Mizo from Katsuki's point of view. He hoped that has taken the Titan out, but he knows that it won't. Out from the smoke is three hands. They roughly grab Katsuki's shirt and pull him in. Katsuki is then slammed on the ground. Katsuki panics. He knows one punch from Mizo will take him out. No doubt in his mind. Katsuki swings his arms up and fires out in explosions after explosions to propel himself away. Katsuki skates across the ground, his butt on fire, part of his shirt gone. Mizo probably still has it in his hand. But Katsuki breathes, he isn't dead. Yet. Katsuki looks up and sees Mizo charging at him again. He reaches his arms out, and his tentacle appendages extend out all the way to him. Katsuki growls and blows all of them up in a second with 4 separate explosions. But Mizo was still on his way. Mizo, with his right arm, and blocks the entire front of his body. Mizo goes in for a shuddered and pulled himself up. A single step would have been a loss for him. "Pull me back," Hitoshi commanded, and Tenya complied, dragging Hitoshi back into the arena. Hitoshi sighed and put a hand on his chest, relieved that he didn't instantly loose. "Now do me a favor and loose," Hitoshi commanded, which Tenya complied and walked out of the boundary. Hitoshi released Tenya from his hold, then started walking out of the stadium. Ida has walked out of bounds. Shinso is the winner. Midnight yells out. The chorus of cheers and praises Hitoshi hears as he walks out makes him smile, although he'll never admit it. The final match of the second round. The boy coming in on the left is someone who resembles a human Pikachu, Denki Kaminari. The girl on the left, the final contender of Class 1B, Mother Nature's daughter Ibara Shiozaki. Present Mike shouted excitedly. Denki came bounding into the stadium with a bright smile. He waved at the audience yet again as he came in. Ibara was the complete opposite, looking incredibly bored and trying her best to ignore the audience. The two shook hands, and Denki tried setting up a bit of small talk, but Ibara completely ignored him. "All right, you two can start fighting now," Midnight yells. Denki instantly starts running towards Ibara as she sends out vines towards him. Denki has to dodge the vines as he isn't stupid enough to not know that he can't shock them. But the vines are too quick. They snatch Denki's right wrist, yanking him off balance. More vines follow up and wrap around Denki, restricting him with ease. Denki is lifted into the air as he struggles to free himself. Denny growls and bites his tongue as small thorns in the vines start scratching his skins. Denki starts buzzing electricity around him in hopes of creating a small spark to burn the vines. "Kaminari, are you out?" Midnight asked, looking up at the struggling figure of Denki. Denki shook his head and smiled. "Nope," Denki said proudly as several patches of the vines holding him sparked into fire. The crowd gasped, including Ibara. The vines loosened around Denki, and he was dropped to the ground. Not unscathed as parts of his body are burned. Denki fuels himself with electricity and kicks his body into overdrive. He then sprints over towards Ibara. Ibara was slightly panicked as most of her vines were dangling in the air, but she still had some to attack Denki as she pushed her other ones into the ground. Denki jumped over vines, flailing on the ground as he approached Ibara. He knew the same trick of him escaping won't work a second time, and this technique will leave him numb after using it, so he had to end the fight now. He couldn't be sure if Ibra had something prepared or not, so he decided to test that. Denki smirked and raised his arms in front of his face and charged up his electricity so it became wild around his body. 1,000,000 volts. Denki yelled. At his words, he saw Ibra turn around and create a shield of vines to protect herself. Denki smirked as he continued to charge. He jumped to the side where Ibra wasn't protected, and her eyes widened when she saw Denki. Denki flared his charged electricity and hit Ibra. She screamed in pain before dropping to the ground. Denki was slightly loopy, and he could feel BLD running out of his nose, but he still smiled. He stumbled around and saluted to the crowd. Shiozaki is incapacitated. Kaminari is the victor. Midnight shouts out. Denki laughs, but stumbles back, holding his head. He couldn't feel his face, nor anything for that matter. Medbots came and collected both Ibra and Denki and took them to the infirmary. Katsuki Bakugo versus Fumikage Tokoyami. Hitoshi Shinso versus Denki Kaminari. Katsuki was standing in his entrance to the stadium. He pushed his hands through his hand and sighed. He was up against Fumikage. In theory, this should be an easy fight. Katsuki created light, and that weakened Dark Shadow. But it was never that easy. Fumikage was smart, so Katsuki would have to work for this victory. Alright everyone, we are in the finals. Coming in from the left is the boy who has exploded his way through the competition, Katsuki Bakugo. Then from the right is a boy whose partner is a shadow that can move as fast as light, Fumikage Tokoyami. Present Mike shouted. Katsuki and Fumikage walked over to each other. They shook each other's hands before walking backwards, their eyes never leaving each other's. Midnight raised her hand. Okay, let's do this boys' fight. She hollered. Katsuki raised his hands and was prepared to attack the screaming bird of shadows. But Dark Shadow never charged at him. Dark Shadow shot out from Fumikage, but instead of attacking, they coiled around Fumikage, giving him self-defense. Katsuki swore at that. He knew Fumikage wouldn't make it easy on him, but this was just going to be infuriating. Katsuki then charged forward with his arms outstretched. Dark Shadow dropped down in front of Fumikage, but did not charge to attack Katsuki until he was close. The black bird screamed and raised its fist, but Katsuki just exploded it. He knocked it away before lunging into the dark coil Fumikage had created. Fumikage was standing with a wide stance and was waiting for Katsuki to attack. Katsuki happily did and popped an explosion right at Fumikage. But the bird teen dodged. Katsuki swore and activated his quirk again, and this time struck Fumikage. Katsuki then shouted in pain. Large claws dug into his back and ripped him out of the hole he was leaning into so he could attack Fumikage. Katsuki was punched in the stomach, and he spat out saliva onto the ground. Katsuki shouted and blasted the Dark Shadow. The shadow bird screamed as it was knocked away. Katsuki stood back up and looked over to Fumikage, only to realize he couldn't see him, because his smoke was completely surrounding the raven-headed teen. Katsuki suddenly realized that he was in deep SHD. He saw deep red eyes pop out from the smoke. Katsuki knew he had to get away. He exploded the ground and got airborne, trying to push himself away. But Dark Shadow was still quick. A large claw reached out from the smoke and slapped Katsuki out of the air. Katsuki screamed as he hit the ground. But he couldn't rest as the giant shadow beast now charged at him. Katsuki popped out an explosion at the beast's face before launching himself away. Katsuki barely escaped the crash of the giant shadow beast. Katsuki looked around for the host of the monster and saw Fumikage maneuvering himself around to be behind the shadow. Smart one. Katsuki saw that Dark Shadow dove back into the small smoke pile to maintain its enhanced size. But Katsuki had noticed the monstrous size of Dark Shadow was a lot more manageable than it once was. Katsuki shot himself up into the air and over the oncoming beast. Katsuki flew into the air in hopes to lead the shadow away from Fumikage, which may have worked against Dark Shadow, but not when Fumikage was ordering him. But Katsuki wasn't done. He shot himself down, Dark Shadow back to his regular size. It was prepared to pounce at Katsuki, but that wouldn't happen. Katsuki smirked and put his hands close together, his palms facing one another. He created light in his palms. Katsuki squeezed his eyes shut before erupting an extremely bright flash. He heard Dark Shadow scream and Fumikage grunt. Katsuki cracked his eyes open and exploded himself down towards Fumikichi. He punched the bird head in the face and knocked him to the ground. Katsuki knelt down on top of him and pinned him to the ground. He grabbed Fumikichi's beak and pointed his other palm of his hand threateningly at Fumikichi, sparks buzzing in his palm. "Give up," Katsuki spat, incredibly out of breath as he breathed above Fumikichi. Fumikichi cracked his eyes open. His eyes connected with Katsuki before sighing and slumping his head back. "I concede," Fumikichi said. Midnight blew her whistle. "Tokoyami has surrendered. Bakugo is the winner," Midnight yelled. Katsuki grunted as he forced himself up. He looked down at the laying figure of Fumikichi and sighed. He reached his hand down for the boy. Fumikichi looked at the hand before taking it. Katsuki pulled the raven head up and Fumikichi thanked him. "God, that was tough. F your shadow," Katsuki said as he shoved his hands down his pocket. Dark shadow immediately popped out from Fumikichi's chest. "Hey, I'll rip you apart, pom-pom," Dark shadow squawked. That made both Katsuki and Fumikichi laugh. Hitoshi stood at the entrance with his arms crossed over his chest. He had made it a lot farther than what he thought. That book he was given randomly really did help him understand more strategies that he could use with his quirk, despite not being able to test the questions the book also asked. Hitoshi sighed as he was getting ready to walk into the stadium. He knew no matter what, he could not win. Katsuki had won against Fumikichi, and there was no way Hitoshi could beat him. It wouldn't have mattered if Fumikichi pulled a miracle and won. He would have lost to him anyway. Hitoshi had made an effort to keep his quirk activation a secret. No one had an exact idea from what he knew. The best guess was proximity or touch. But since Hitoshi loses next round, and he also needs to take Denki out immediately, he may as well not play any games. This is the final of match of the finals round. The winner here will face Bakugo in the grand finale for this year's winner. Coming in from the left is this year's underdog that has taken this year's competition with ease, Hitoshi Shinso. His opponent coming in from the right is the light bulb of electricity, Denki Kaminari. Present Mike shouted. Hitoshi and Denki walked out into the field, Denki doing his usual wave to the crowd. Hitoshi rolled his eyes at his opponent's childish behavior. The boys shook hands before trotting backwards to their spot in the ground. Midnight waggles her eyebrows and lifts her arm up into the air. "This is for second place, boys. Ready, go?" Midnight shouted. Denki charges electricity up around him, but Hitoshi didn't really care. He looked to an open spot behind Denki and pointed to it. "Is that a toaster?" Hitoshi asked, hoping the idiot blonde will fall for the bait. "Huh," Denki says as he turns around. "Gotcha," Hitoshi thinks as he activates his quirk. "All right, go walk out of bounds," Hitoshi says tiredly as he pushes his hand back in his pocket. Denki took a step forward before stopping. Hitoshi was confused. Electricity started buzzing around Denki's head before switching off. Denki then gasped as it seemed like he woke up. He looked around before he started laughing. Hitoshi was just in shock. How did he get out of the trance? "Oh, you ask questions," Denki said as he put the pieces of the puzzle together. "Sorry, Shinso, but it looks like your quirk doesn't work on me," Denki said, looking back over to the usual tired teen, who now had a wide-eyed expression. "How did you get out?" Hitoshi asked, slightly angered. Denki shrugs and allows a bit of electricity running around him. "My electricity affects my cognitive ability, and I have to focus to not let it run wild as it can't be turned off. I guess that directly counters your quirk," Denki said. Hitoshi gritted his teeth and clenched his feet. What the F? He had won. He took control of his opponent only for it to not work. "Hey man, sorry you went against me, but you did an awesome job. Can't wait to see you in the hero course," Denki said. Hitoshi looked up at him confused. "I mean, it would be ridiculous for you not to be let in. That would be wasted potential," Denki said with a large smile. Hitoshi looked at him before dropping his head. He released the tension he held in his body and let his arms become loose. He took a deep breath and exhaled it out. Hitoshi then reached up and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I guess I just lose then. I forfeit," Hitoshi states in his regularly tired tone. "Are you sure?" Midnight asked and Hitoshi yawned. "Yeah, don't feel like getting shocked. Good luck in your next match, man," Hitoshi says, looking over to Denki, who smiles widely. "Thanks, man," Denki replied with a thumbs up. Midnight blew her whistle and raised her hand. Shinso has forfeit, giving Kaminari the win. She yelled. True that the fight may have been anticlimactic, but Hitoshi didn't care. This entire experience had made him happier than he has been since his quirk diagnosis. Katsuki Bakugo vs. Denki Kaminari. Katsuki grunts as he walks the hallways of the UA stadium as he angrily ruffles his hair. He had one more fight, on more battle, and then he would be fighting his old friends in prevention of them getting into UA. Katsuki growls as he turns to his waiting room. Angrily, he kicks the door open and stomps in. The thought of those hooligans just sees him off. Katsuki walks into the room and looks up, then pauses as someone else was in his room. Denki was sitting in a chair, drinking a chocolate smoothie. He was looking up at Katsuki with a straw in his mouth and his phone in his left hand. Katsuki frowns and narrows his eyes at his next opponent. "What are you doing in my room?" he asks. Denki raises an eyebrow. "No, this is my room." "Your room is 1. This is 2, Denki states. Katsuki grunts and walks backwards. He reaches the door and looks up above it. The big number 2 is right above it, making Katsuki groan. He drops his head and shoves his hands in his pockets. Katsuki takes one more step into the room before pausing. "Sorry," Katsuki says as he realizes he was being a major butt. Denki meanwhile just smiled, which makes Katsuki grunt at how joyful the idiot was. Denki stood up, putting his phone and drink down. "It's cool, man, but what's got you so worked up?" he asked. Katsuki looked at him before muttering a curse under his breath. What was he going to say to Denki, huh? That he was fighting to win so he could prevent his ex-friends from getting another chance at becoming heroes? He already fed up in telling Denki that he knew Izuku before he became Hope. Katsuki doesn't want to F up even more. He just wants to get this last match over with. But then a thought rang out in Katsuki's head. Could he beat Denki? Mizo he could, because Katsuki had better mobility options and could attack a lot more than Mizo could. Fumikage had the weakness to light, which Katsuki's quirk so happened to make. Denki, however, what advantage did he have? Both of them had quirks that require the duo to be at close range. But Denki has the ability to push his quirk at a lot further range. Not only that, Katsuki wasn't sure one attack would take Denki out, and most certainly one shock from Denki would finish him. Even if he wasn't incapacitated, his sweat would all have been fried. If Katsuki lost and Denki won, Denki would be the one fighting his ex-friends. Katsuki seemingly played situations out in his head in the middle of the room, while Denki just waited expectantly for him. Eventually, Katsuki groaned and slammed his hands on his face. He walked over and grabbed a chair before sitting down. "All right, Pikachu, sit down and listen," Katsuki said sternly. Denki nodded and complied with no words, sitting down in his previous seat. Katsuki sighed and CK'd himself up. "Remember when I told you I knew Hope before he became Hope?" Katsuki asked, and Denki nodded. "How you were his bully?" Denki asked for confirmation, with got a strangled grunt from Katsuki. "Yeah, well, I wasn't alone," Katsuki said. He felt something attack his eyes, and he quickly wiped it and forced it away. "With my twin sister, I, along with another set of twins, and Hope's sister, bullied him relentlessly." Katsuki started, but Denki butted in. "Wait, you're telling me Hope's twin sister bullied him along with you guys?" Denki asked, completely shocked and appalled. Katsuki sneered and nodded his head. "Yeah, I know. Anyway, when he ran away and it was discovered what we did, we had to do several things to get a shot at UA. Community service, assist in villain reform programs, and get a good review. I was the only one seen fit enough to be able to go to UA. The rest of them failed. But since those idiots have hero parents, they have another shot. Depending on which one of us wins, we'll fight them, and the ones who beat us get entry into UA," Katsuki states. Denki is silent for a moment. He has his hands pressed together, his elbows on his knees, and resting his face up against his hands. Katsuki could see that Denki was becoming angry. The usual jovial teen was easy to read. "So you're telling me," Denki starts, sitting back in his chair, "that Hope had hero parents, they didn't notice all the SHD that he was put through, and are giving their daughter and her friends another shot at UA after they failed the first time?" Denki asked, trying to get this straight. Katsuki nodded after every point. Denki ummed and put his head in his hands. "Unbelievable. Who are they?" Denki asked. Katsuki grunted and crossed his arms over his chest. "I can't tell you that, but even if I could, you wouldn't believe me, as they are very popularly and respected heroes," Katsuki states. Denki seems to get even angrier at that. Denki was about to speak, but the announcer came on, telling the two boys to get ready to go in. Katsuki sighed and looked at Denki. Do not go easy on me or let me win. Just promise me if you win, you kick their buttes, Katsuki says sternly. Denki nods his head and smiled at Katsuki. You got it, Baku bro, Denki says determinedly. Welcome everybody to the grand finale. We have our 2 finalists. Coming in on the right is Katsuki Bakugo. His opponent on the left is Denki Kaminari. Present Mike shouts. Denki and Katsuki walk to each other in the stadium. The crowd was roaring in cheers as the 2 boys came in. They shook each other's hands and wished each other good luck. Toshinori, Inko, Shoto, Zayato, Katsumi, Izumi, and Rei were focused on the 2 boys. They were going to fight one of them. All right, this is it, you boys. Fight with all of your heart's content. Fight. Midnight screams. At those words, Katsuki zooms towards Denki with the use of his explosions. He goes higher into the air before falling back quickly when Denki releases a large charge around him. Katsuki goes back in and repeats this. Denki quickly realizes he was trying to bait him, so Denki holds on for one large electrocution attack. Katsuki growls as his one trick to weaken Denki quickly stops working. He needs one large attack to end this battle. So Katsuki uses his explosion to spin himself incredibly fast in the air. He falls down to the ground quickly, Katsuki's sight barely there. But he presses on. Denki sees this and unleashes his electricity as Katsuki comes crashing in. Cementos, stop it! Midnight yelled quickly to the hero behind her. She knew what was about to happen was going to be dangerous. Cementos dropped his hands onto the ground and activates his quirk. A wall of Cementos appeared between Denki and Katsuki, but it didn't last long. Katsuki unleashed his powered explosion and completely decimates the wall. A thunderous boom sounded for miles, and a mushroom cloud rose from the stadium. No one could see the thing, and everyone was staring down to see if at least one of the boys were okay, although it looked pretty grim. After about a minute, the smoke eventually cleared. Denki was on the ground, still conscious although not in there. His pupils were dilated, and his grin was sloppy. He had thumbs raised in the air, and he was mumbling incoherently. Katsuki was on the other side of the stadium, his face in the ground, and his body twitching violently as electricity sparked off of him. Visible scorch marks were present on Katsuki in a huge area of the ground. Eventually, Present Mike coughed, which caught the audience's attention. Katsuki is incapacitated, meaning Denki Kaminari is the winner of this year's Junior Sports Festival. Present Mike shouts. The crowd then roars as people cheered. Zayato was staring down wide-eyed. Whoa, she said quietly. Katsumi, however, was laughing as she looked at Denki's stupefied state. Oh my god, that's what we're up against. Fing pathetic, she laughed. Rei smiled and patted her daughter's arm. Don't worry, sweetie, they are no one. You guys got this, she said softly. Izumi, however, was staring down the field, a feeling of guilt and resentment welling up inside her. She did not deserve this. She knew that. How must Katsuki feel? Shigaraki looked at the television screen. He had been watching the sports festival because UAs are geniuses and still held it after the USJ. So Shigaraki was looking at the kids. One of them caught his eye. The 4 kids on the podium were all strong, but the boy in second place seemed familiar, like he was told about him. Shigaraki turned to Kurojairi as he was wiping wine glasses. Kurojairi, what do you know about a Katsuki Bakugo? Shigaraki asked with his raspy voice. He was one of Izuku Yagi's bullies, but managed to reform and make it into UA. He was the only one of his group to do so, Kurojairi stated. Shigaraki hummed and turned back to the television, an amused expression on his face. Ex-tormentor to the poser sensei? He may be useful in the future, Shigaraki mused. Kurojairi nodded his head. He had no clue what Shigaraki was thinking, and it was his job to support him. But whatever plan he had in mind would have to wait. They had to get Dabi first. So, this was the end of part 10 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.